Chapter 23. Outside of Feiyun village, a group of strong villagers, led by Zhou Zhong, walked towards the mountains in the distance. Lin Sun was also in the team. He had promised to help Zhou Zhong to clear the pests in his spiritual land when he came back from hunting. But the only condition was that Zhou Zhong should take him with him to hunt. Zhou Zhong agreed without hesitation. Zhou Zhong's wife caught a cold a while ago. She had just recovered, but she was very weak and needed to replenish her qi and blood. Therefore, Zhou Zhong's main purpose in this trip was to collect some medicines to replenish qi and blood, not to hunt. As an experienced hunter in Feiyun village, Zhou Zhong knew very well about the dangers in the mountains. Therefore, even if it was just to collect medicines, he would ask some strong villagers to follow him to ensure his safety. As for Lin Sun, who insisted on joining them, Zhou Zhong was not worried at all. He had also heard that Lin Sun had defeated Lu Ting yesterday. In terms of fighting capacity, Lin Sun was much stronger than the villagers. Even with Zhou Zhong leading the way, it took them more than an hour to reach the foot of the mountains. Looking ahead, the mountains were so high that they pierced the sky and were shrouded by thick clouds and mist from the mountainside. Faintly, a series of roars of beasts could be heard coming from the deep mountains, which was quite horrifying. Be careful, everyone. It's very dangerous in the deep mountains and forests. There are not only fierce beasts, but also miasma and poisonous insects. Follow me closely and don't wander around. In front of the vast forest at the foot of the mountains, Zhou Zhong took off his longbow and held it in his hand, looking around vigilantly. The other villagers also took out their weapons, and their expressions became solemn. They were just ordinary people. Although they were strong and agile, they were not practitioners after all. Facing such a deep forest, no one dared to be careless. Lin Sun thought for a while, and also took out his pale, cyan dagger in his hand. Once the group was ready, they immediately entered the vast forest and soon disappeared out of sight. This forest was very large, with towering ancient trees with luxuriant branches and leaves that covered the sky. The air was damp and gloomy. Some of the vines were even as thick as buckets, hanging all over the forest like pythons. Fallen leaves had piled up on the ground, and there were also strange and bewitching flowers and plants growing. They were obviously poisonous. The nerves of Zhou Zhong and the others were taut as they moved forward cautiously. No one dared to speak again for fear of attracting the attacks of poisonous insects and ferocious beasts. Lin Sun, on the other hand, seemed to be very relaxed. He even had time to observe the scenery he saw along the way and squat down from time to time to pick some flowers and plants. Violet luster flower, jade stargrass, three-leaf silver thread vine, scarlet-tailed bitter root. I didn't expect there to be so many spiritual materials hidden in this ancient forest. Lin Sun felt a little happy. As a spiritual tattoo apprentice, Lin Sun had been dealing with all kinds of spiritual materials since he was a child. Naturally, he could tell which was good and which was useless at a glance. With this kind of experience and eyesight, he saw many spirit materials along the way. Most of them could be used in medicine, and they could also be used as materials to refine spirit ink. Of course, it could also be sold for money. It was a pleasant surprise for Lin Sun. Unfortunately, in Feiyun village, even if there were spiritual materials, they could hardly be exchanged for money, let alone filling one's stomach. Lin Sun carried an animal skin bag as high as a man with him, so he didn't have to worry about not having a place to put spiritual materials. Little brother Lin Sun, why are you picking these things? Seeing Lin Sun picking flowers and plants from time to time along the way, Zhou Zhong finally couldn't help asking in a low voice. Not only Zhou Zhong, but also other villagers were quite curious. Lin Sun didn't conceal anything and told them the value of these spiritual materials one by one. How could the villagers understand these things? They were all confused. But when they heard that these things could be sold for money, their eyes all lit up and they all asked Lin Sun for advice. Lin Sun readily agreed. Then, under Lin Sun's guidance, the villagers began to search along the way. It was indeed not a joke that there was strength in numbers. In just 30 minutes, Lin Sun's animal skin bag was filled up. From this, It could be seen that although this vast forest that was almost uninhabited was dangerous, it was also a good place to hide various spirit materials. Of course, if Lin Sun hadn't followed them this time, these villagers would never have known that these things they regarded as flowers and plants could actually be sold for money. Just as they were moving forward in high spirits, Lin Sun suddenly stopped and waved his hand to signal them to stop. Under the puzzled eyes of Zhou Zhong and others, Lin Sun suddenly grabbed the bow and arrow from Zhou Zhong's hand and climbed up an old tree nearby. Then he took a deep breath and put an arrow on the bow, with the cold and sharp arrowhead pointing to the distance. Seeing this, the villagers immediately understood that a fierce beast must be approaching. All of a sudden, they all tensed up and got ready for a fight. Roar! In just a few breaths, a deafening roar of a beast resounded from afar like thunder, scaring the birds in the forest and scurrying away. Shit! It's a snow-spot leopard. Zhou Zhong's face changed. With years of hunting experience, he could tell from the sound that it was a snow-spot leopard. The beast was as big as an ox, snow-white and dotted with many black spots. It was ferocious and cunning. Lien Rufeng, the leader of the village guards, was once attacked by a snow-spot leopard. At that time, Lien Rufeng had already reached the level of inner strong. Even so, he was almost killed by the snow-spot leopard. It was not hard to imagine how ferocious it was. As expected, hearing the name of snow-spot leopard, the other villagers turned pale and clenched their weapons nervously. They never thought that the peaceful atmosphere along the way would be broken by a snow-spot leopard. It was too dangerous. One careless move, and they might lose their lives here. Whoosh! In the blink of an eye, a snow-white silhouette passed through the forest and pounced towards Zhou Zhong, who was in the lead, as fast as lightning. It was too fast. Even though Zhou Zhong was prepared for it, he was too slow to react. Before he could raise his long saber, a bloody mouth had already swallowed him. Right when Zhou Zhong was about to suffer a calamity, the snow-white figure let out a howl of pain, and its pouncing motion suddenly stopped before it fell to the ground. Only then did the villagers see that it was indeed a snow-spot leopard. But there was an arrow stuck in its hind leg, and blood was flowing out. Obviously, this arrow saved Zhou Zhong's life. Roar, however, before the crowd could recover from the shock, the snow-spot leopard roared and leaped up, charging at them again with its ferocious nature. The bloody smell that assaulted their faces seemed like the signal of death, and it caused Zhou Zhong and the others to be astounded as they retreated endlessly in panic. Whoosh! Almost at the same time, a cyan blade fell from the sky and slashed at the snow-spot leopard's neck from a precise angle. Puff! Blood splattered 3 feet high, and the snow-spot leopard's head flew into the air. It lost control of its body and fell to the ground. Did it die just like that? Zhou Zhong and the others couldn't believe their eyes. This was a snow-spot leopard. Even Lien Rufeng, who had reached the level of inner strong, was almost killed by it. But now it was killed by an arrow and a saber. At this time, Lin Sun came to the body of the snow-spot leopard with the cyan dagger in his hand. He stabbed the tip of the dagger into the heart of the snow-spot leopard, and blood gushed out. At the same time, Lin Sun took out a leather bag and put the blood into it. The snow-spot leopard was not an ordinary beast, but a ferocious beast. The blood essence of its heart was full of energy, which could be used as medicine or by swallowing. Lin Sun didn't stop until the leather bag was full of blood essence. He turned around and said, "Guys, the blood of the snow-spot leopard is good stuff. Don't waste it." Only then did Zhou Zhong and the others wake up from their stupor. They stepped forward, took out their water bags, and started moving. "Brother Lin Sun, you're amazing. This is an adult snow-spot leopard. Its skin alone can be exchanged for 10 copper coins in the Green Sun tribe, and its meat is also very popular." Zhou Zhong exclaimed. The others also nodded and looked at Lin Sun with admiration. It was beyond their imagination that a 13-year-old boy could kill an adult snow-spot leopard by himself. Lin Sun smiled and said, "Let's collect the valuable things of the snow-spot leopard as soon as possible. The smell of blood here is too strong. I'm afraid it won't take long to attract other ferocious beasts." Zhou Zhong and the others also understood this. Without hesitation, they dissected the skin, flesh, bones, and tendons of the snow-spot leopard. Then, they wrapped them in a large leaf called fish-blocking grass and put them into their animal skin bags. The pungent smell of the fish-blocking grass could suppress the smell of blood. In this way, other ferocious beasts could not smell the blood and follow them. Before long, Lin Sun and the others moved forward again. After the attack, Zhou Zhong and the others became more cautious. They even stopped collecting spiritual materials and concentrated on moving forward. Lin Sun was the same as before, but he had become picky. He didn't bother to collect the less valuable spiritual materials. Most importantly, the number of bee skin bags they brought was limited, and they couldn't store too many spiritual materials, so they could only abandon a portion of the spiritual materials that weren't of much use. After walking in silence for a long time, Zhou Zhong suddenly frowned and whispered, "Something is wrong." Usually, when we entered this forest, we would be attacked by at least 7 or 8 beasts. But this time, we encountered nothing except a snow-spot leopard. What the hell? The other villagers nodded in agreement. The situation was indeed unusual. At this time, Lin Sun seemed to find something. He quickened his pace and stopped behind a big tree dozens of meters away. Soon, Lin Sun's voice came. "Look here. It seems that someone else has been here before us." Zhou Zhong and the others hurriedly rushed over, and they immediately saw the corpse of a ferocious beast that was shaped like a lizard and covered in dark green scales lying on the ground behind the tree. Chapter 24. One-Horned Lizard. Zhou Zhong and his fellows immediately recognized that the dead beast on the ground was an adult one-horned lizard. There was a very strict standard for the classification of beasts. They were divided into 3 categories: wild beasts, fierce beasts, and fierce beasts. Jackals, martens, foxes, and leopards could only be regarded as wild beasts. Fierce beasts were fierce, but ordinary hunters could hunt them down. Fierce beasts refer to tigers, leopards, wild boars, bulls, bears, and so on. They could even kill practitioners who had just set foot on the road of cultivation. However, ominous beasts were completely different. They were all overlords in the mountains, and many of them had some intelligence. Even the weakest ominous beast could easily kill a practitioner at the first level of martial realm. As for the more powerful ominous beasts, even a practitioner at the 9th level of martial realm had to flee. The snowspot leopard Lin and his fellows had hunted before was a fierce beast. But compared with the one-horned lizard, it was just an ordinary fierce beast. Therefore, the one-horned lizard could kill practitioners on the 5th level of martial realm. Aperture's opening. Zhou Zhong had been hunting for so many years. Although he knew how terrible the one-horned lizard was, it was the first time he had seen it with his own eyes. Fortunately, the one-horned lizard was dead. Otherwise, they would all die here. Lin squatted down and carefully examined the wound of the one-horned lizard. This beast was shaped like a raging bull. Its 4 hooves were like pillars, and its entire body was covered in dark green scales. There was a crescent moon-shaped horn on its head, but at this time, the horn had obviously been dug out by someone, leaving only a bloody hole. And in its throat, there was also a bloody hole the size of a baby's fist. The edge of the wound was neat. Looking at the posture of the beast when it died, Lin immediately judged that the beast might have been pierced through the throat by a spear-like weapon and died on the spot. Thinking of this, Lin was secretly shocked. The fighting capacity of a person who could kill an adult one-horned lizard with one blow was at least above Aperture's opening, the 5th level of martial realm. Could it be that there was another powerful practitioner in this deep mountain forest besides them? The one who can kill this fierce beast is much more powerful than Lien Rufeng, the guard commander of our village. Zhou Zhong and his fellows were amazed. "We have to leave." Lin made a prompt decision and said quickly, "Leave." Zhou Zhong and the others were taken aback. "If I'm not wrong, that cultivator must be very powerful. He's not someone we can fight against. He must have appeared in this deep forest to achieve some kind of goal. If we encounter him, it's hard to guarantee that nothing will happen." Lin Sun said casually, "Of course, it's possible that they won't make things difficult for us. But for the sake of safety, we'd better leave as soon as possible." Zhou Zhong and the others thought about it and understood this logic. They immediately agreed. Before they left, Lin Sun and the others dissected the one-horned lizard's body one by one and put it into their animal skin bags. The one-horned lizard's entire body was a treasure, especially its scales, which were difficult to damage with blades and swords. They were perfect for refining into armor, and if he sold them, he would be able to sell them for a very tempting price. In addition, its bones and flesh were great supplements, while its teeth and claws were excellent materials for forging weapons. Unfortunately, its most valuable horn had already been dug out by others. Nevertheless, Lin Sun and the others were satisfied. It was definitely an unexpected gain to pick up a one-horned lizard's body. As for the herbs that Zhou Zhong had planned to collect, there was no need to do that, because the flesh and blood of the one-horned lizard were much more effective than those herbs for replenishing qi and blood. Without further delay, they went back along the way they came. While Lin Sun and the others were leaving, in the depths of this ancient forest, a series of roars sounded. Towering trees were incinerated and fell down with a loud crash. A giant wolf with a body as red as fire turned into a shadow and fled at full speed. It didn't even have time to dodge. It ran wildly all the way, uprooting trees and uprooting mountains. If Lin Sun were here, he would definitely recognize that it was a lava wolf. This kind of fierce beast not only had intelligence, but also knew how to absorb the essence of the sun and the moon to cultivate. It could easily kill an overmatch at the 9th level of martial realm. However, at this moment, the lava wolf looked so frightened and panicked, as if there was a terrifying opponent chasing after it. Clang! All of a sudden, a silvery shadow as bright as the stars appeared. Like a rainbow, it tore the air at an incredible speed and disappeared in a flash. Howl! The magma wave that was charging at full speed let out an incomparably mournful roar. Soon after, its entire body violently smashed onto the ground. The flames that were emitted from its body incinerated all the trees within 100 feet radius, and the ground was charred black. The sound soon disappeared. The lava wolf had been killed on the spot. Looking carefully, one could see that a white bone spear more than 10 meters long penetrated its back and nailed its body to the ground. Immediately, a young figure walked out of the depths of the forest. It was a girl of only 6 or 7 years old. Her long black hair fell over her shoulders. Her slim body was wrapped in an old hide skirt, and her bare feet were as white as jade. She looked like a descendant of a barbarian tribe. Her face was clear and white, delicate and pretty. Her eyes were curved like a pair of crescent moons, deep and dark. Her every move revealed a quiet and light spirit that didn't match her age. She went straight to the side of the lava wolf. Compared to the huge lava wolf, her small and slender figure seemed so tiny. But with a single leap, she landed on the back of the giant lava wolf. She stretched out her jade-like hand and gently lifted it up. Blood splashed everywhere as she pulled out the bone spear that was more than 10 feet long. The bone spear was completely pure white and flowed with strands of silver light. It was suffused like starlight, and it gave this 6 or 7-year-old little girl a mysterious aura. Obviously, the lava wolf was killed by the little girl. If this scene was seen by some practitioners, it was unknown how shocked they would be. The little girl bent down and searched the wound of the giant lava wolf. Soon, she took out a crimson crystal the size of pigeon egg. A trace of a smile couldn't help but suffuse the corners of the little girl's mouth when she saw this. At this instant, the smile she revealed was like a flower bud that had bloomed after the rain, and it carried an otherworldly beauty that caused the heavens and the earth to dim in comparison. After the little girl took the fire crystal, she planned to leave. But at this moment, she seemed to sense something. A pair of straight black eyebrows furrowed, and her eyes looked into the depths of the forest. She sensed a faintly discernible, unique aura in a faraway place that made her soul feel a trace of strangeness. It was not repulsion or hatred, but a kind of desire and joy. It was very strange. The little girl had never experienced such a feeling. She was stunned, and her clear and deep crescent eyes were filled with confusion. Dong! Dong! Suddenly, The sky and earth shook. The ancient forest seemed to tremble. The fierce beasts hiding in the forest all crawled on the ground, trembling. The little girl was immediately awakened. She turned her head and saw a huge figure more than 10 feet tall walking over. It was an extremely majestic and burly black bear, but it moved like a small mountain. Along the way, the trees collapsed and the earth trembled. It was extremely terrifying. Yeah. The little girl seemed to think of something. She gestured with her hands and made an incomprehensible sound. The black bear stopped and shook its head as if it was refusing. The little girl seemed to be somewhat disappointed, but then she gritted her teeth and leaped. Her small and slender body was like a cannonball as she charged in the opposite direction of the forest. But just halfway, the little girl was held in the book by a huge bear paw and could not struggle at all. Yeah. The little girl shouted, but the black bear seemed to ignore her. It turned its head and walked deeper and deeper into the forest, going further and further away. The little girl was immediately extremely disappointed. She sat in the bear paw and stared blankly at the place that was getting further and further away. Her little face was filled with confusion. On the way back from the forest, a shrill and thunderous roar suddenly came from the depths of the forest. Lin and the others were shocked, and their faces changed abruptly. Lava wolf. God, did the strong man who killed the one-horned lizard kill a lava wolf now? That strong man must be in the gang spirit realm. Otherwise, there is no way for him to do this. Gang spirit realm? Impossible. I heard that even in the Green Sun tribe, there is no one in the gang spirit realm. Judging from the direction of the roar, it is the place where we were going just now. Fortunately, we reacted quickly and didn't go there. The crowd burst into an uproar and were all shocked. Lin also felt lucky in his heart. If they'd gone there rashly, they might have been killed. But even he couldn't help wondering who the strong man who killed the one-horned lizard and the lava wolf was. And where did he come from? Let's get out of this damn place quickly. Today's action is too unusual. We can't stay here any longer, Zhou Zhong said worriedly. The others naturally wouldn't object. After the time it took for an incense stick to burn, Lin and the others walked out of the dense forest. It was noon, and the sun was high in the sky. What a great harvest this time. Let's go. Let's go back to the village quickly. We should make the others happy with such a great harvest. Hey, I think you can't wait to go back and show off, right? What's wrong with showing off? It's the first time in my life that I've brought back the dead bodies of a snow spot leopard and a one-horned lizard. Not everyone has the chance to see this. Leaving the dark and dangerous forest, Zhou Zhong and the others were obviously relieved. Looking at the full animal skin bags on their backs, they all cheered up. Lin turned around and looked at the dense forest in the distance quietly. He thought to himself, what on earth is hidden here that attracts a strong man who is strong enough to kill a lava wolf? I must come back and explore again when I have the chance. Shaking his head, Lin stopped thinking and went back to Feiyun village with Zhou Zhong and the others. Chapter 25. When Lin and his companions returned to Feiyun village with a bountiful harvest, they immediately caused a great sensation. Snowspot leopard, one-horned lizard. Many of the villagers had never seen such a ferocious beast with their own eyes. So when they heard about this, all of them gathered around. Zhou Zhong and his companions were also very proud. They had hunted countless beasts for so many years, but it was the first time for them to bring back a fierce beast carcass. How happy they were! At this time, in the courtyard where Lin Sun lived, there were all kinds of harvests on the ground, and all kinds of spiritual materials were spread all over the ground. But the most attractive ones were the skin, bones, tendons, meat, blood, and so on from the snowspot leopard and the one-horned lizard. The villagers' eyes fell on them, their faces full of amazement and envy. Although there were many practitioners in the village, such as Lien Rufeng, who had reached the 3rd level of manor opening in martial realm, he had never hunted a fierce beast like the snowspot leopard, let alone the one-horned lizard, which was even more powerful than the snowspot leopard. When they heard that the snowspot leopard was killed by Lin Sun alone, the villagers' eyes on Lin Sun changed. A 13-year-old lad killed an adult snowspot leopard all by himself. For the villagers, It was like listening to a legendary story. Unconsciously, they were in awe of Lin's son. Zhou, what are you going to do with all these treasures? Someone suddenly asked. On the way, Lin Sun had discussed with Zhou and his companions that the spiritual materials collected would be used as supplies for the village, except for some for Lin Sun's own use. When there was a chance, they would sell them in Green Sun Tribe for other supplies. As for the things from the snow-spot leopard and the one-horned lizard, they would keep them for themselves. After all, it was not easy to get such treasures. Who would have the heart to sell them? Zhou took a look at Lin Sun. Seeing Lin Sun nodding with a smile, Zhou straightened his back and said, Everyone, I have discussed with Lin Sun. Although the snow-spot leopard and the one-horned lizard were brought back by us, we are all villagers of the same village, and we are as close as brothers and sisters. Naturally, we should have a share of the flesh and blood of the two beasts. Hearing this, the villagers burst into cheers and beamed with joy. They had never expected such a good thing. Although they were all villagers of Feiyun Village, each family's property was private. It was not uncommon for Lin Sun to share his property with everyone, but it had never happened before that he would share the two fierce beasts he had killed with everyone. Ha ha ha! In that case, give me a share of the skin and blood of the snow-spot leopard and the scales of the one-horned lizard. Suddenly, the crowd was pushed aside and Lu Ting strode in. His greedy eyes swept over the snow-spot leopard and the one-horned lizard, and then he opened his mouth. Behind Lu Ting, Qian Shi, who was lean and strong, also came up. He was looking at the scene with his arms crossed. When his eyes occasionally swept over the trophies on the ground, his eyes became scorching. Suddenly, the atmosphere became awkward, and many people frowned. What Lu Ting wanted were the most valuable parts of the snow-spot leopard and the one-horned lizard. Of course, it was disgusting that he asked for them so directly. Even Zhou's face darkened. He had made it clear that he would only share the flesh and blood of the two fierce beasts, and nothing else. Lu Ting, however, seemed not to notice the others' gazes. He stepped forward and was about to take them himself. Zhou couldn't stand it anymore and said, Stop, they are not yours. Lu Ting frowned and said fiercely, Idiot, you are not practitioners. How can you use these treasures? Only in my hands can they show their value. As he said, he grabbed the skin of the snow-spot leopard, looking rude and arrogant. Clang! A pale cyan blade stopped in front of Lu Ting, which made his movement stagnate. His cheek muscles couldn't help but twitch. Then he straightened up and looked at Lin Sun with resentment. Do you want to beat me? Before his voice died away, Qian Shi, who had been watching from afar with his arms crossed, came up with a cold look. The atmosphere became tense. Lin Sun said with a smile, These are the beasts I killed. Have you asked for my permission before you take the treasures? Although he was smiling, the pale cyan dagger in his hand was firmly pointed at Lu Ting. Yes, these are the trophies of little brother Lin. Lu Ting, you've gone too far. The others began to talk at once. Since Lin had helped to eradicate the pests in the spiritual field, the villagers had already regarded him as one of their own. Naturally, they wouldn't let him be bullied by Lu Ting. Lu Ting's face suddenly darkened. He shouted, Shut up! Who gave you the right to interrupt me? If it weren't for Brother Lien Rufeng and I guarding the village, you would have been dead by now. How dare you help an outsider against me? You must be tired of living. The villagers all turned pale, shocked and angry. But they had to admit that it was Lu Ting and his fellows who transported goods to the Green Sun Tribe to exchange for daily necessities. But in the past year, the supplies Lu Ting and his fellows brought back had become less and less, which had already caused dissatisfaction among the villagers. Unfortunately, the villagers could only swallow their anger. After all, if they wanted to survive in the future, they still needed Lu Ting and his fellows to exchange for supplies in the Green Sun Tribe. Seeing that no one opposed him, Lu Ting couldn't help sneering. But when he looked at Lin Sun, his face darkened again. Boy, give me a straight answer. Are you going to give it to me or not? Lu Ting's tone was obviously threatening. At this time, Qian Shi also looked at Lin Sun, his eyes cold and frightening. He didn't want to offend Lin Sun in the village in case of provoking public anger. But when he saw the snow-spot leopard and the one-horned lizard, He couldn't help but be greedy and couldn't care less. If Lin Sun dared to refuse, Qianqi wouldn't mind teaching him a painful lesson in public. Lin Sun also noticed the hostility in Qianqi's eyes. He couldn't help sneering in his heart. These two guys were so arrogant that they could even rob something in such a righteous way. Do you want it? It's simple. Be me first. Lin Sun said casually, looking relaxed and calm with a smile hanging on his lips. You're courting death. Lu Ting grinned and glanced at Qianqi secretly. Qianqi took the hint and stepped up from one side, blocking Lin Sun's way of retreat. Seeing this, all the villagers were furious. Who would have thought that Lu Ting and Qianqi would become so shameless and unreasonable? Zhou Zhong was worried and said to Lin Sun in a low voice, "How about giving some to them?" What he meant was that a wise man knew better than to fight when the odds were against him. For the sake of his own life, he had to bear with it. Lin Sun said resolutely, "There is no room for negotiation." Good, that's how it should be. At this moment, a loud shout was heard. Shirao Tianren, the village head, appeared in the courtyard. Seeing Shirao Tianren, all the villagers were refreshed as if they had found their backbone. Lin Sun also showed a faint smile. If it were any other time, Lin Sun would choose to bear with it temporarily and then find a chance to get even with them. But now it was different. Lin Sun had expected that Shirao Tianren wouldn't just sit back and do nothing, so he dared to confront Lu Ting and Qianqi alone. Lu Ting and Qianqi couldn't help frowning at Shirao Tianren's appearance, but they soon recovered. Obviously, they didn't care much about Shirao Tianren. Shirao Tianren looked dignified. He glanced at Lu Ting and Qianqi and shouted in a low voice, "How dare you two? Robbing in the village. Do you think I, the village head, am not here?" After a pause, Shirao Tianren said coldly, "You robbed Lin Sun's stuff today. Are you going to rob other people's stuff tomorrow?" Hearing this, the other villagers were shocked. Lu Ting was so rude and unreasonable. What if he came to their house in the future? What would they do? For a moment, they all looked at Lu Ting with the same hatred for a common enemy. Lu Ting frowned and became impatient. He pointed at Shirao Tianren and said, "Old Shirao, we have always respected you these years. Don't be so shameless." Shirao Tianren's face darkened at his words. Lin Sun sneered in his heart. Lu Ting was really an idiot. What he did would only make all the villagers dislike him. Well, let's stop talking. We really misunderstood you today. Let's go. Qianqi suddenly opened his mouth, grabbed Lu Ting's arm, and walked out. What are you doing? Don't you want the skin of the snow-spot leopard? Don't you want the scales of the one-horned lizard? They can be used to make a good armor. Lu Ting shouted and struggled, but he was dragged away by Qianqi. Seeing this, Shirao Tianren's face was still gloomy, but he was obviously relieved. Seeing the villagers looking at him, he couldn't help feeling upset. He waved his hand and said, "Well, it's all right. You can leave now." The villagers also knew it was not a good time to stay, so they left one after another. Soon, only Lin Sun, Shirao Tianren, and Zhou Zhong were left. Without outsiders, Shirao Tianren sighed. "I didn't expect them to be so arrogant." Alas! Lin Sun smiled and didn't answer his question. Qianqi is smart. He knows they won't be able to take advantage of you since you are here. Shirao Tianren shook his head and said, "It's just temporary. They didn't get it this time, so I'm afraid they will find another chance to come to us." Lin Sun nodded and thought for a moment before saying, "Uncle Shirao, what would you think if these two people suddenly disappeared one day?" The hidden meaning of this sentence was, if I have the chance to kill Lu Ting and the other two, will you object to it? Looking at Lin Sun's clear and calm eyes, Shirao Tianren's eyelids twitched. After a while, he said resolutely, "It's better if they disappear. It's good for all the villagers in Feiyun." Chapter 26. It was noon, and the sun was scorching. But the conversation between Shirao Tianren and Lin Sun sent chills down Zhou Zhong's spine. How could he not know that Lin Sun wanted to kill Lu Ting and Qianqi? Although Lu Ting, Qianqi, and other escorts had conspired with Lien Ruffing to plunder the villagers' belongings, which had caused much resentment among the villagers, they belonged to the same village after all. But after all, they were from the same village. Most importantly, if they wanted to live in the future, they had to exchange materials for Lien Ruffin and the others in Green Sun tribe. If they were killed, who would exchange materials for Feiyun village in the future? But Zhou Zhong also knew that Lien Ruffin and his companions had changed. They were more arrogant and nasty than before. They had no respect for the villagers. If they were allowed to do whatever they wanted, the consequences would be unimaginable. Thinking it over, Zhou Zhong sighed in his heart. Since it was the village head's decision, there must be a reason for it. After chatting for a while, Shirao Tonrin left in a hurry. Zhou Zhong didn't want to stay any longer. After dividing up the spoils on the ground with Lin Sun, he found some strong villagers to work with him and distributed the spoils to each family in the village. Of course, Lu Ting and Qian Shi were the only two people who didn't have any objection. After all, what they did just now was too much. In the middle of the courtyard, an iron pot was set up with a bonfire. The blood of the snowspot leopard in the pot was boiling and smoking. Lin Sun stood beside it, quickly throwing spiritual materials into the pot, such as blood coagulation grass, spiritual dandelion flower, red-purple fruit. Each spiritual material was a kind of elixir used to refine bones and flesh. When refined together with the blood of the snowspot leopard, it could bring out the best effect. This was the method of smelting spiritual materials. As a spiritual tattooist, he must be able to identify spiritual materials and smelt spiritual ink. Lin Sun had been learning from Master Lu since he was a child, so he knew the properties and effects of all kinds of spiritual materials like the back of his hand. But this time, he didn't do it for smelting spiritual ink, but for cultivation. 2 hours later, the spiritual materials in the iron pot had completely fused with the blood of the snowspot leopard, turning into a pot of viscous dark red liquid. It was a medicinal soup called spirit-quenching liquid. Lin found a water sack and carefully collected the pot of spirit-quenching liquid. Only then did he smile, as if he had been relieved of a heavy burden. The spirit-tempering liquid was a good thing. It could refine one's qi and blood, strengthen one's muscles and bones, and was extremely beneficial to the tempering of one's physique. Gulp, Lin Sun poured out a bowl of thick and fragrant spirit-refining liquid and swallowed it in one gulp. He felt a hot torrent rushing to his limbs and bones. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Lin Sun performed the marching boxing in the courtyard. His movements were vigorous and swift. His silhouette kept moving about in the courtyard, stirring up a cloud of dust and producing a dull explosion in the air. Soon, Lin Sun's qi and blood were boiling, and there were even wisps of white smoke rising from the top of his head. His whole body was burning like a furnace. He felt that there was endless strength in his muscles, bones, and skin, and he didn't feel tired at all. After the time it took for an incense stick to burn, Lin Sun twisted and swung his spine like a dragon and rushed forward. His fists roared like a raging sea, making a deafening roar. Bang! A hole was punched through the surface of a huge green rock in the middle of the courtyard. The flying debris hit the wall like rain, making a puffing sound. It seemed that Lin Sun's punch was powerful. The seventh move of marching boxing. Raging sea destroys mountains. In the past, Lin Sun couldn't exert the power of this move at all because his heart vessel and 4 acupoints were damaged. But now he not only exerted it, but also looked calm and breathed slowly, as if it was effortless. On the one hand, it was because his heart vessel and 4 acupoints had benefited from the misfortune and condensed into 4 spiritual vortexes. Not only did he not feel sluggish when he exerted his punches, but the quality of his spiritual energy had also improved. On the other hand, his physique had begun to transform and become much stronger than before. Moreover, he had swallowed the spirit-refining liquid, which had begun to refine his body. Therefore, he could exert the full power of raging sea destroys mountains in one fell swoop. Lin Sun was overjoyed that such a great change had taken place in just a few days. Without hesitation, Lin Sun's figure flashed, and his fists suddenly changed. His eyes were like lightning. In an instant, he seemed to have become a general fighting on the battlefield. Boom! The fist force was like a dragon as it punched out in the air with a majestic aura. It was filled with a brutal and murderous energy, and one could see the air being shaken to the point of transforming into ripples that spread in all directions. The eighth move of marching boxing, bloody fighting in all directions. Lin Sun stood where he was, feeling the power contained in this punch. Although he was slightly out of breath, his eyes were bright. Now, he could finally exert the full power of the 8 moves of marching boxing. Lin Sun took a deep breath and calmed his eyes. If I meet Lu Ting again at this time, I can kill him with one punch. This was an absolute confidence. Although Lin Sun's cultivation had stagnated at inner strong, the second level of martial realm, for 2 years, his spiritual energy was extremely strong and solid. Now, after being refined by 4 spiritual vortexes, the quality of his spiritual energy had been improved more than once, which doubled his combat effectiveness. Under such circumstances, it would be a joke if he couldn't defeat Lu Ting easily. Qin Shi. Lin Sun's clear eyes flashed with a touch of coldness when he thought of that tough and gloomy man. Qin Shi was a strong practitioner at the 3rd level of martial realm. Lin Sun dared not to be careless when facing him. At night, Lin Sun cooked a pot of snow-spot leopard meat and ate it with spiritual grain rice. Without wasting any time, he returned to his room and continued his cultivation. He was clear that from today on, Lu Ting and Qin Shi would definitely regard him as a thorn in their side. Even if he didn't kill them, they would certainly not let him go. Lin Sun was not one to resign himself to death. Now that he had decided to eradicate these 2 disasters, he dared not slack off. Lin Sun had mastered few fighting skills, all of which were taught by Master Lu when he was young. One was marching boxing, and the other was 6-word saber play. Marching boxing was a basic boxing method widely spread in Xiao Empire, and Lin Sun had mastered it skillfully. 6-word saber play was a bladesmanship divided into 6 movements, namely chop, coil, spin, shock, stab, and peel, each of which had its own secret. When Master Lu taught Lin Sun this bladesmanship, it was just to improve his speed of dissecting spiritual materials. He didn't tell Lin the origin of this bladesmanship. After all, dissecting some complicated spiritual materials required superb bladesmanship. However, since Lin Sun started to practice it, he found that this bladesmanship was not used for dissecting spiritual materials, but an extremely lethal one. For example, the chop of 6-word saber play could be divided into 17 movements, such as heavy chop, side chop, straight chop, belt chop, trap chop, and so on. Each movement was aimed at the enemy's vital parts precisely and ruthlessly. Although Lin Sun could master the 6-word saber play skillfully with his current means, he hadn't fully understood the mystery and essence of each move yet. He could only be regarded as a beginner of it. But even so, the power of this bladesmanship could not be underestimated. For example, when he defeated Lu Ting in the martial arts field the day before yesterday, Lin used the heavy chop of chop to break Lu Ting's long whip. It was not hard to imagine how powerful it was. Lin Sun had long suspected that 6-word saber play must have a profound origin and was definitely not an ordinary cultivation method. Unfortunately, Master Lu had never explained all this to him. All in all, marching boxing and 6-word saber play were the fighting methods Lin Sun had mastered now, which were more than enough to deal with ordinary opponents. What Lin Sun valued more was cultivation, which was the fundamental determinant of combat effectiveness. For example, no matter how skillfully a child practiced marching boxing, without cultivation, it was just a fancy boxing with no power to speak of. Only with the support of cultivation could one's combat effectiveness be fully reflected. Clatter, like a stream of spiritual energy circulating in his body, Lin Sun's mind was clear and tranquil. With the spiritual energy contained in the meat of the snow-spot leopard and the spiritual grains as a supplement, Lin Sun's cultivation, which had been reduced by half due to the condensation of spiritual energy, became full again after the spiritual energy circulated for 18 times. Lin Sun even sensed a sign of promotion. This undoubtedly proved that after obtaining the heaven-accessing place, he had gotten rid of the misfortune of being unable to cultivate and started a new life of cultivation. I'll definitely make a breakthrough in 7 days. In the dark room, Lin Sun's eyes were bright and full of confidence. If he could make a breakthrough in 7 days, it would be no big deal for him to fight against Qian Shi. That night, Lin Sun continued to meditate on meditating magic, visualizing the star circulation and condensing his spirit after cultivating the spiritual energy all over his body. Until dawn broke, Lin Sun was full of energy and didn't feel tired at all, although he didn't sleep all night. On the contrary, his 6 senses, eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind, became more and more sensitive. Outside the window, the breeze rustled willow leaves, the creeping silkworm pupae under the ground, the rustling sound of dew sliding down grass, the fluttering sound of butterflies flapping their wings, and the sound of airflow flowing in the air. All kinds of sounds were like the sounds of nature, forming a lively picture. Such unique and clear sounds reflected in his mind made Lin Sun's state of mind much more tranquil and peaceful. Lin Sun had never experienced the feeling of distinguishing sounds with 6 senses and peeping at the world and the subtleties. And that was the effect of practicing the meditating magic, which made his soul stronger. Soul. This was the treasure of cultivation, which involved the root of understanding and wisdom. It was mysterious and indescribable. Even for the powerful practitioners in Tao Insight Realm, they could only explore and understand it little by little. But Lin Sun, who had just entered the 2nd level of Martial Realm, had already begun to touch the wonders of soul. Chapter 27. Bang! The porcelain cup was smashed to the ground, splashing debris everywhere. Lu Ting's face was gloomy. He gritted his teeth and said, "Qian Shi, why did you stop me just now? It would have been a piece of cake for us to kill that little thing." Qian Shi frowned and said, "Shurao Tunrin and the others were there. Do you think they would just watch us kill him?" Lu Ting snorted and said, "Those guys don't know how to cultivate. Even if they helped that little thing, so what? I could suppress them all by myself." Qian Shi frowned even harder. How could this guy be so stupid to offend Shurao Tianren and the others? It would help them plant spiritual fields in the future. Qian Shi didn't bother to explain and said directly, "Don't forget what I told you last time. In a few days, Lin Sun will go with Pockmark Sun to eradicate pests in the spiritual fields more than 20 kilometers away. That will be the time he dies." Lu Ting was stunned, but he was still unwilling to give up. He said fiercely, "Fine, I'll wait for a few days." Qian Shi smiled and said slowly, "At that time, as long as this little guy wants, the treasures on the snow-spot leopard and the one-horned lizard will be ours." Lu Ting felt excited, and his face became ferocious. "Little thing, I'll let you live a few more days." For several days in a row, Lin Sun spent the rest of his time on cultivation, except helping the villagers to eradicate the pests in the spiritual fields. Meditating on the meditating magic, practicing the spirit concentrating manual, practicing the marching boxing, and 6-word saber play. Lin Sun used almost every spare moment without any slack. Although he had given out a lot of the meat of the snow-spot leopard and the one-horned lizard, the rest was enough for Lin Sun to eat for more than 10 days. With the supplement of the flesh and blood of the 2 fierce beasts, Lin Sun's cultivation speed was obviously accelerated. Just yesterday, he even had the chance to advance to the 3rd level of Martial Realm, but he held back in the end. Now that he had 4 spiritual energy vortexes in his heart vessel and 4 acupoints, the amount of spiritual energy he could refine seemed to have decreased, but the quality of his spiritual energy had risen by 4 levels. It had become pure and condensed, thick and solid. According to Lin Sun's idea, it wouldn't be too late to choose to break through the realm when all the spiritual energy in his body was fully refined. The reason for doing so was very simple. It was to go further on the path of cultivation in the future. The more solid one's foundation was, the smoother one's future path towards the Tao would be. This was an irrefutable principle since ancient times. However, There were very few people who could achieve this step because not everyone could have a spiritual vortex to refine spiritual energy like Lin Sun. Based on the talent of an ordinary Shioja, their cultivation foundation was already determined and could not be changed. Therefore, it was impossible to forge a solid foundation. Early in the morning, Lin Sun woke up for meditation. He breathed in and out like an arrow, condensed and long, and the spiritual energy around him flowed energetically and fully. I'll be able to advance tomorrow or the day after. Lin Sun took a deep breath. Like a whale swallowing water, the air around him turned into a torrent and poured into his mouth, rushing to his limbs and bones. Then he spat out a puff of turbid air from his nose. In cultivation, this phenomenon was called expelling the old and breathing in the new. Swallowing the superior air to temper the whole body's qi and finally spitting out the turbid air in the body. This was also a sign that Lin Sun was about to advance to the third level of martial realm, mansion opening. Mansion opening was the opening of the 5 viscera, which corresponded to the 5 elements. If the meridians of the 5 viscera could be dredged and the spiritual energy could be guided to run in them, it meant that the practitioner had taken another step forward on the road of cultivation. Expelling the old and breathing in the new was the preparation for mansion opening. It cleared away the turbid air in the body and guided the spiritual energy to dredge the 5 viscera. In this way, the practitioner's qi, vitality, spiritual opportunity, and so on would all have new changes. Walking out of the room, Lin Sun practiced marching boxing and 6-word saber play in the morning light. Then he washed up in a hurry and left home. Today, he would go with Pockmark Sun to help in the spiritual land more than 10 miles away from Feiyun village. He had to set off early and try to get back before noon. On the road in the village, villagers who saw Lin Sun all greeted him warmly, and Lin Sun nodded to them with a smile. Through his efforts these days, Lin Sun had long been integrated into the village and was accepted and respected by all the villagers. "Uncle Lin, when will you teach us martial arts?" On the way, a little boy asked loudly. "Soon, in a few days." Lin Sun smiled and touched the little boy's head. Then he walked out of the village with Pockmark Sun, who was waiting in the distance. Now, only the pests in Pockmark Sun's spiritual land had not been solved. As long as this was done, Lin Sun could spare some time to instruct the children in the village in martial arts. Pockmark Sun was an honest and dull middle-aged man, and he didn't say a word all the way. After more than 2 hours, they came to a spiritual land, which covered an area of 4 acres. Not far from the spiritual land was the Smoking Mountain. When Lin Sun arrived here, he couldn't help but take another look at the Smoking Mountain. The mountain was more than 300 meters high, steep and dangerous, with exposed rocks. Different from the pale cyan of other mountains nearby, this mountain showed a kind of red color, like a burning flame, which was quite eye-catching. More than 100 years ago, a practitioner from Donglin town of Xiao Empire passed by here and found a small mineral vein in the hinterland of the Smoking Mountain, which was rich in Feiyun fire copper. That was the origin of the name of Feiyun village. However, as time went by, when the mineral vein was dug out, the big shots who worked there left, leaving a group of slaves to fend for themselves. Now the villagers living in Feiyun village were all descendants of the slaves who were abandoned here. Lin Sun had heard of this past from Shurao Tianren, so when he saw the Smoking Mountain, he couldn't help but look at it a few more times. However, as far as he knew, the place with the mineral vein of Feiyun fire copper was always a place with unique feng shui, and there was a lot to pay attention to. If there's a chance, I'll go there and have a look. If those guys who worked there were blind, I can take advantage of it. Thinking of this, Lin Sun made up his mind. Without any delay, Lin Sun took out his tools, walked into the spiritual field, and began to inscribe the light-attracting spiritual tattoo. Pockmark Sun was waiting not far from the spiritual field. "The little guy is here. Let's do it." At the foot of the Smoking Mountain, not far from the spiritual field, Lu Ting hid behind a boulder, with a ferocious and excited look on his face. Let's wait a little longer. Every time he inscribes spiritual tattoos, he will consume all his spiritual energy. That's the best time to kill him. Qianqi looked calm and composed. He was a cautious man. Lu Ting was a little dissatisfied, saying, "With our cultivation, can't we deal with a little guy at the second level of martial realm? Be careful." Qianqi was not moved. Lu Ting was also helpless. He glared at Lin Sun with anger. It was hard for him to understand why Qianqi, who was at the third level of martial realm, paid so much attention to Lin Sun. Before long, a buzzing sound came from the spiritual field in the distance, and a golden light shot straight up to the sky. This was the silver light spiritual tattoo coming into effect. Qianqi could not help sighing at the sight, saying, "With his ability, if he doesn't fight against us, we can make him work for brother Lien Ruffin. What a pity. Don't be a hypocrite." Lu Ting spat disdainfully. Qianqi smiled and did not take it seriously. He stood up and walked towards the spiritual field in the distance. "Let's go. It's time to harvest." "You should have done it earlier." Lu Ting had been waiting impatiently for a long time. He suddenly stood up with a giant hammer in his hand and rushed over like a bloodthirsty bull. The light-attracting spiritual tattoo would be able to kill all the pests in a short time. Lin Sun did not need to look to know the result. He turned around and walked out of the spiritual field, but to his surprise, Pockmarked Sun was nowhere to be found. "What?" Lin Sun glanced around and felt strange in his heart. Suddenly, he saw two figures rushing towards him from a distance. One was thin and fierce, with a long spear in his hand. The other was burly and ferocious, with a huge hammer in his hand. They were Qianqi and Lu Ting. Obviously, they were not friendly, but Lin Sun did not panic. He had expected that Lu Ting and Qianqi would come for him, but he did not expect it would be today. Thinking about the sudden disappearance of Pockmarked Sun, Lin Sun suddenly realized that Pockmarked Sun must have colluded with Lu Ting and Qianqi. Now there was no one here, and it was far from Feiyun Village. It was impossible to ask for help here, so it was indeed a good place to kill someone. Lin Sun knew that this must be Qianqi's plan. Lu Ting was so rude that he would not have such a thorough plan. He stood there quietly, watching Lu Ting and Qianqi getting closer and closer. His face was calm, and there was a faint smile on his lips. "Finally, you two are here," Lin Sun said softly. Both Lu Ting and Qianqi were stunned. They had thought that Lin Sun had encountered such a sudden change, and were worried that Lin Sun would run away. Little did they expect that Lin Sun would just stand there quietly, as if waiting for them. "Don't pretend. I'd like to see who can save you today." Lu Ting swore loudly. Seeing Lin Sun so calm, he became more angry and resentful. Qianqi was also surprised by Lin Sun's calmness, but he soon regained his composure. His eyes were cold and sharp. No matter what tricks Lin Sun would play, he would definitely die today. "You've picked a good place. I've been worrying about where to kill you silently. I didn't expect that you've already dug a burial ground for yourselves, which makes me feel much more relaxed." With a smile, Lin Sun slowly drew out the pale, cyan dagger from his waist. At this moment, his temperament suddenly changed. Chapter 28. His eyebrows were as sharp as a knife, and his eyes were as cold as lightning. At this moment, Lin Sun seemed to have become another person. His breath was solemn and calm, not like that of a 13-year-old boy at all. Whoosh! Without any hesitation, Lin Sun made his move. His figure flashed, and the pale cyan dagger in his hand drew a tricky arc and chopped at Qianqi. Under such circumstances, there was no room for maneuver. Taking the initiative was the best choice. The air was torn apart by the saber light like a piece of cloth, and the whistling sound of the saber stung people's eardrums. The saber was like a waterfall, and its momentum was like a rainbow. Buzz! Qianqi reacted quickly. He shook the iron spear in his hand, and with a flash of cold light, he met Lin Sun's attack skillfully and fiercely. Following Lien Ruffin to escort goods between Green Sun Tribe and Feiyun Village all year round, Qianqi had not only killed fierce beasts, but also fought bloody battles with many bandits. His fighting experience was incomparable. At this moment, of course, he would not be caught off guard by Lin Sun's sudden attack. Lu Ting was similar to Qianqi. Reckless as he was, he had rich fighting experience. Seeing Lin Sun pointing his spear at Qianqi, Lu Ting could not help but sneer in his heart. One idiot. Any normal person would not fight with Qianqi under such circumstances. After all, there seemed to be only one level between the second level and the third level of martial realm, but there was a world of difference between the two levels. However, to Lu Ting's surprise, when Lin Sun was about to fight with Qianqi, Lin Sun suddenly turned around, stepped on the ground with the tip of his foot, and suddenly changed his direction to attack Lu Ting. Whoosh! The pale cyan saber light was as fast as lightning and as fierce as the wind. It was the stab of the chop of six-word saber play. Stab was the way of deceit. It was a surprise attack. Stabbing and chopping was unpredictable and impossible to guard against. It had an indomitable aura of killing with a single strike. Lu Ting's pupils suddenly shrank. He suddenly realized that Lin Sun was just feinting, and his real target was not Qianqi. Lu Ting roared and raised his giant hammer to block in front of him. At the same time, he retreated quickly to avoid the attack. However, how could Lin miss such an opportunity? The pale cyan blade suddenly changed from stab and chop to sticky of entanglement. Like a silkworm spinning silk, the blade was attached to Lu Ting's giant hammer like a magnet. Boom! It seemed to be a gentle and lingering saber, but when it touched the giant hammer, an unparalleled force surged over. Lu Ting's right wrist cracked, and the giant hammer fell to the ground. Lu Ting, on the other hand, felt as if he had been hit by a raging bull. Blood spurted from his mouth and nose, and he was sent flying more than 10 meters away. He fainted before he could even scream. Lin Sun didn't look at Lu Ting anymore after he succeeded in his attack. He moved his body and narrowly avoided Qianqi, who was coming at him from one side. Lu Ting, Qianqi's face darkened, and his heart trembled. This series of actions was completed in a few blinks of an eye, so fast that he couldn't even help. Qianqi also didn't expect that Lin Sun would be so cunning that he would change his moves in the middle of the fight. Lin Sun's target was not him, but Lu Ting. However, Lu Ting's performance was so weak that he was defeated with only one blow. What a cunning little thing. Qianqi's voice was cold and full of killing intent. He stared at Lin Sun with eyes as sharp as a blade. Obviously, he was really angry. Lin Sun seemed to be unaware of it. He just smiled and rushed at Qianqi with his saber. He didn't want to talk nonsense. After killing Lu Ting, he had one less stumbling block and could focus on dealing with Qianqi, a strong practitioner at the third level of martial realm. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The cyan blade danced in the air. Sometimes it was agile like a dancing butterfly. Sometimes it was heavy like a mountain. Sometimes it was like a landslide or a tsunami. And sometimes it was like a spark or lightning that shot out in all directions. The six-word saber technique was fully displayed. It could be said that he was like a dragon, and his saber was like an avalanche. Lin Sun didn't give Qianqi a chance to breathe. The spear skill Qianqi practiced was called Sparrowhawk Spear. Its moves were cunning and vicious, with irresistible force. As a strong practitioner at the level of mansion opening, his fighting capacity was undoubtedly strong. It only took him a moment to kill an ordinary practitioner at the second level of martial realm. However, at this moment, Qianqi was too tired to fight back. He kept retreating and couldn't fight back at all. Qianqi's eyes were so sharp that he could tell at a glance that the power of Lin Sun's saber play was extraordinary. If that was all, he could suppress Lin Sun with his higher cultivation. But Qianqi didn't expect that Lin Sun's strength was not inferior to his at all. How could it be possible? How could a 13-year-old boy at the second level of martial realm have such strong spiritual energy? Qianqi was shocked and angry. As a cautious person, he soon realized that he had underestimated this boy. He often went to the Green Sun tribe these years, so he knew that there were many talented young practitioners in the world who seemed to be of low cultivation, but once they started fighting, they could often defeat those at higher levels. Such young heroes were usually only seen once in 100 years. Even in the Green Sun tribe, which had 8,000 residents, only a few people had such talent and fighting capacity. Was Lin Sun also a genius with excellent aptitude? Although Qianqi forced himself to stay calm, he was a little confused. He originally thought that Lin Sun was just a spiritual apprentice and nothing to worry about. But later, because Lu Ting was defeated by Lin Sun twice in a row, he finally began to pay attention to Lin Sun. But when he really fought with Lin Sun this time, he finally realized that Lin Sun's fighting capacity was completely beyond his expectation. This was not a good thing. Crack! Suddenly, Qianqi felt a sharp pain in his arms. The iron spear in his hand was cut into two. Oh no! Qianqi suddenly came to his senses. His face suddenly changed, and he dared not to let his imagination run wild anymore. With a shrill cry, he turned around and fled. He was already frightened. The broken iron spear was no less than a heavy blow to him, which made him realize clearly that he was not Lin Sun's opponent at all. So if he didn't run away now, when would he? Qianqi had made up his mind. After this escape, he would immediately go to the Green Sun tribe and tell Lien Ruffing about this. Lin Sun was too scary. However, at the moment when Qianqi turned around to flee, Lin Sun threw out the pale, cyan dagger without hesitation. Whoosh! The dagger pierced through the air, emitting a sharp whistling sound as if it was chasing after a soul. It was incredibly fast. In just an instant, a loud bang was heard as the dagger stabbed into Qianqi's back, sending him flying to the ground with blood gushing out. Qianqi screamed, his face full of fear and pain. He struggled to get up, but Lin Sun rushed over and stepped on him. Lin Sun pulled out the dagger from his back and cut Qianqi's throat. From the beginning to the end, Lin Sun did not say a word, and his actions were experienced and skillful. Qianqi's eyeballs bulged. He wanted to turn around and look at Lin Sun, but he finally fell to the ground and died. Gurgling, blood flowed from Qianqi's throat and dyed the ground red. Lin Sun turned a blind eye to it. After making sure Qianqi was dead, he turned to Lu Ting in the distance and pierced his heart with his dagger. At this point, Lu Ting and Qianqi were completely dead. It was only a moment from the beginning to the end of the battle. Lin Sun let out a long breath and stared blankly at Lu Ting's body. His eyes were a little unfocused. It was the first time for him to kill someone in his life, so it was natural for him to be nervous. In order to make himself less nervous, Lin Sun had been practicing crazily in the past few days. He knew he would have to confront Lu Ting and Qianqi one day, so he didn't forget to deduce and prepare various tactics and means while practicing. Sometimes, perfect preparation was the beginning of creating miracles. Lin Sun didn't want to create miracles. All his efforts were just to kill Lu Ting and Qianqi. But even Lin Sun didn't expect that Qianqi and Lu Ting's fighting capacity was not as strong as he thought. Yes, it was not surprising that Lin Sun could suppress Lu Ting with one blow. What surprised him was that he didn't feel much pressure when facing Qianqi, a strong practitioner at the third level of martial realm. Moreover, as the battle went on, he increasingly felt that Qianqi's fighting capacity was no threat to him at all. At first, Lin Sun thought Qianqi was deliberately showing weakness. But when he killed Qianqi, Lin Sun finally dared to confirm that Qianqi was really weak. What was going on? Lin Sun couldn't figure it out. In order to kill Qianqi, he had prepared other means, and even prepared to risk his life. Who would have thought that he could defeat Qianqi with only his own cultivation? It seems that this guy is also an ordinary person. Lin Sun took a deep breath and couldn't help laughing at himself. He had been nervous for several days, which was really making a mountain out of a molehill. In fact, Lin Sun misjudged Qianqi and underestimated himself. Although Qianqi wasn't one of the best in the third level of martial realm, he was also a tough guy with rich fighting capacity. But Lin Sun didn't realize that because of the spiritual vortex, his cultivation had been refined to a very solid level. The spiritual energy in his body was not only pure and vigorous, but also its quality had been improved 4 times. In addition, he had been practicing hard these days, feeding on the flesh and blood of the snow-spot leopard and the one-horned lizard, which made his strength both inside and outside of his body greatly improved. With the help of the unique and cruel 6-word saber play, it was reasonable for him to kill Qian Shi, a practitioner at the third level of martial realm. Without thinking more, Lin Sun glanced around and finally fixed his eyes on the smoking mountain in the distance. It was said that there was a mine tunnel dug out in the hinterland of the smoking mountain. Although it was abandoned now, it was a good place to destroy the corpses. Before long, Lin Sun came to the foot of the smoking mountain with the dead bodies of Lu Ting and Qian Shi and found the abandoned mine tunnel. Chapter 29. Lin Sun didn't know that Qian Shi and Lu Ting's original plan was to kill Lin Sun and discard his body in the abandoned mine. However, it turned out that Lin Sun and Lu Ting had planned to kill Lin Sun and discard his body in the abandoned mine. The abandoned mine was so deep that Lin Sun couldn't see the end of it. After a careful look, Lin Sun walked in with Qian Shi and Lu Ting's bodies. The mine was winding and dark. The walls were covered with rugged rocks of a bloody red color. Many excavated places could be seen. There used to be a small Feiyun fire copper vein here, but it had been abandoned for more than 100 years. Maybe all the Feiyun fire copper in it had been dug out. But Lin Sun didn't come here for it. After walking in the winding mine for about 15 minutes, Lin Sun stopped in front of a pit. After throwing Lu Ting and Qian Shi's corpses into the pit, Lin Sun didn't leave. Instead, he continued to move forward along the mine. But the deeper he went, the more damp and cold it was, and the quieter it was. The dark environment made Lin Sun's hair stand on end. Squeak! Suddenly, a sharp howl resounded out as a wisp of a fiery line suddenly shot out violently from the depths of the mine, and it tore through the darkness and was extremely dazzling. Sure enough, Lin Sun wasn't surprised. Instead, a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Puff! With a shake of his wrist and a flash of saber light, the line of fire was split open and fell to the ground like a rain of fire. Lin Sun bent down and saw that it was a bat, but its head was chopped off at this moment. The bat looked extremely ferocious, with fangs and bulging eyes. Its wings were bright red, as if they were made of fresh blood. Red blood bat. Lin Sun had read an ancient book called All Spirits Atlas collected by Master Lu when he was a child. There was a record of red blood bats in it. It was a strange species that lived at night and lived by thirsting for blood. If one was bitten by it, he would be poisoned by blood. If not treated in time, he would die in less than 3 days. But Lin Sun didn't care about it. According to the All Spirits Atlas, there must be blood marrow grits in the places where the ruddy blood bats appeared. The blood marrow grit was actually the teeth shed by the scarlet blood bats. Every 3 years, the scarlet blood bats would hit rocks with their beaks and break off their fangs. After resting for a month, they would grow new teeth. For Xiozha, blood marrow grit was a kind of spiritual material with high value. It could be used as medicine, and it could also be used to smelt spiritual ink. However, its greatest value was to help Xiozha cleanse their muscles and bones and refine their marrow. For practitioners who wanted to break through to marrow cleansing, the 5th level of martial realm, the chance of success would increase by at least 20% if they could get the blood spirit sand. Therefore, this blood marrow grit could be considered an expensive spirit material. When Lin Sun learned that there was a mine of Feiyun fire copper in Feiyun village, he had an idea. He knew very well that the places where Feiyun fire copper could be found often attracted the ruddy blood bats to live. The natural environment of Feiyun fire copper could form a natural protection for the bats. Lin Sun was clear about this, so he came up with the idea of exploring this place. However, he couldn't be sure whether the big shots who dug in the mine had also discovered this secret. But now, seeing the ruddy blood bat bumping into his hand, Lin Sun was sure that there must be a lot of blood marrow grit hidden in the depths of this mine. Thinking of this, Lin Sun couldn't help quickening his pace. The blood marrow grit was a good thing. Even if it was sold, it would still fetch a high price. If he could collect some, it would be no less than getting a considerable amount of wealth. Now Lin Sun was poor. If he wanted to enter Xiao Empire in the future, he had to have money. Even if it was for his own cultivation and to go further in spiritual tattoos, Lin Sun had to work hard to make money. There was no other way. Cultivation needed money, and practicing spiritual tattoos also needed a lot of money. There is a saying in the world that every spiritual tattooist was born from mountains of gold and silver. This was not an exaggeration. Inscribing spiritual tattoos required inscribing pen, spiritual ink, and carrier. Among them, spiritual ink was the most expensive. This was because the spirit ink required a variety of spiritual materials to be smelted. The higher the grade of the spirit inscription, the higher the requirements for the spirit ink. In this way, the requirements for the various spiritual materials needed to refine the spirit ink would not be low. And this was only the spiritual ink. If the selection of inscribing pen and carrier was taken into account, it would be impossible without money. Moreover, it was normal to fail when inscribing spiritual tattoos. A failure was equal to wasting a lot of money. No spiritual tattooist dared to guarantee a perfect success rate. Therefore, to become a spiritual tattooist, in addition to talent and aptitude, a lot of money was also needed. If Lin Sun wanted to go further in spiritual tattoos in the future, he was bound to need money. Of course, if he became a real spiritual tattooist one day, it would be easy for him to make money. There was an old saying in the world that every spiritual tattooist's fingers contained the taste of money, because the spiritual tattoo formations they inscribed could be sold at sky-high prices. Lin Sun had learned spiritual tattoos from Master Lu since he was a child. How could he not understand this? Before becoming a spiritual tattooist, one had to make money crazily, learn and inscribe spiritual tattoos crazily, so that he could have the hope of becoming a spiritual tattooist. But when he became a real spiritual tattooist, wealth, status, and fame were all at his fingertips. In Lin Sun's view, inscribing spiritual tattoos was his survival skill. Only by surviving could he provide wealth and material guarantee for his cultivation. He was neither a son of a rich family who didn't need to worry about money, nor a descendant of a noble family who had all kinds of cultivation resources. He came to Xiao Empire alone, poor, and could only rely on himself. As Lin Sun went deeper into the mine, more and more ruddy blood bats rushed out. Fortunately, these little bats looked ferocious, but their attacking power was very weak, so they were easily killed by Lin Sun. Puff, puff, puff. Along the way, there were only the dull sounds of killing ruddy blood bats, and only Lin Sun's footsteps could be heard. However, as time went by, the number of red blood bats grew larger and larger. Sometimes they came in groups like a rain of fire, so Lin had to be careful. He waved the cyan dagger in his hand so that not even a drop of water could penetrate it. This cyan dagger was given to Lin Sun by Master Lu for self-defense when he was a child. It was made of several rare spiritual materials. Unfortunately, even Master Lu couldn't inscribe spiritual tattoos on it. Therefore, although this cyan dagger was extremely sharp, it was not a graded treasure and could only be regarded as an ordinary weapon. The so-called standard grade meant that it had a grade, and there was only one sign of whether or not it was standard grade, and that was whether or not the treasure had spirit patterns engraved on it. Such treasures inscribed with spiritual tattoos were also called spiritual weapons. According to their power, spiritual weapons were divided into 4 categories: human level, earth level, heaven level, and Pyryong level. Each level was further divided into lower level, middle level, upper level, and top level. Generally speaking, only practitioners whose cultivation was above gang spirit realm could exert its full power. Now Lin Sun was only at the 2nd level of martial realm. Even if he held a spiritual weapon in his hand, it was difficult for him to exert its power. However, although this cyan dagger was not graded and was just an ordinary weapon, its power was extraordinary. After all, it was made of several rare spiritual materials. How could an ordinary one compare to it? This dagger was also called Sky Breacher by Lin Sun, which meant there will be a time when it breaks the sky. With the Sky Breacher in hand, Lin Sun continued to move forward. But to his surprise, this mine was extremely deep, as if there was no end. Up to now, he had been walking for more than 2 hours, at least dozens of miles. The deeper he went, the darker it was. Lin Sun could barely see the road ahead with the help of the dark red halo reflected on the walls on both sides. All this greatly affected his eyesight, which made Lin Sun a little embarrassed when facing the sudden attack of the ruddy bloodbats. Later, Lin Sun gave up the idea of distinguishing the ruddy bloodbats with his eyesight. He held his breath and began to perceive the danger around him with his mind. This was no different from fighting with his eyes closed. At first, Lin Sun was not used to it, and his vital parts were almost bitten by the ruddy bloodbats several times. But later, he gradually became familiar with this fighting style and began to fight with ease. What's more, fighting with perception gave Lin a lot more insight into martial arts cultivation. Some obscure and mysterious parts of the six-word saber play that he hadn't figured out yet were mastered by him one by one. Swish, swish, swish. The saber gleam was like a sudden rainbow that appeared in the darkness, killing all the scarlet bloodbats that came charging at him. By this time, Lin Sun had been immersed in the comprehension of the six-word saber play, completely forgetting the passage of time. His mind was clear and pure. Under such circumstances, his saber technique grew more and more skilled, more and more condensed, and it faintly revealed a strand of the true essence of profundities and sharpness. Fortunately, after comprehending the meditating magic, Lin Sun's soul had been improved and tempered a lot, and his perception of the surrounding environment had become clearer. If it were another practitioner at the second level of martial realm who dared to fight like this without the help of his eyesight, he would have been bitten by the ruddy bloodbats and died on the spot. After a long time, Lin Sun felt that his perception suddenly became empty, and he immediately came to his senses. Looking around, he found he had come to the end of the mine. There was a huge rock wall at the end of the mine, which had not been excavated yet. Obviously, it was a dead end. Chapter 30. The white bones on the ground were frightening. Judging from the postures and clothes of those skeletons, Lin Sun could tell at a glance that they should be slaves who had been caught to mine in those years. Lin Sun squatted on the ground and picked up a piece of bone with a trace of dark red color. He knew that these people should have been killed by the blood poison of the ruddy bloodbats. Thinking of what he had encountered along the way, Lin Sun felt a little sad. These dead slaves were all ordinary people. How could they resist the attack of the ruddy bloodbats? Without much emotion, Lin Sun searched around and found densely packed caves in the shape of beehives on one side of the rock wall. These should be the nests of the ruddy bloodbats. Lin Sun went forward and easily saw a pile of fine white teeth piled up in each nest. These were the blood marrow grits, only the size of a grain of sand. Each grain was as white as jade and felt a trace of coldness in his hand. Crack! Lin Sun picked up a blood marrow grits and pinched it with his fingertips. The white shell of the blood marrow grits broke, and a stream of bright liquid flowed out. Seeing this, Lin Sun couldn't help feeling excited. There were no less than 1,000 nests nearby, and each nest was piled up with blood marrow grits. If all of them were collected, it would definitely be an amazing fortune. Lin Sun took action without hesitation. He peeled off some rags from a skeleton on the ground, took a cloth bag, and began to search for the blood marrow grits. After 10 minutes, all the blood marrow grits were collected, and the cloth bag in Lin Sun's hand had become at least 5 kilograms heavy. Lin Sun smiled. With this bag of blood marrow grits, at least he wouldn't have to worry about money for a period of time. Just as Lin was about to leave, his eyes inadvertently glanced over a rock wall at the end of the mine, and he let out a slight cry of surprise. He went forward and knocked on the rock wall. Then he seemed to think of something. Holding the sky breacher, he cut the rock wall hard with the blade. With a rustle, the rock debris fell, and a crack as deep as 4 fingers appeared. Lin Sun dipped a little rock powder on the crack with his fingertips and rubbed it gently. A trace of slight heat spread on his fingertips. Lin Sun's eyes brightened, and he continued to dig with the blade in his hand. When he dug more than a foot deep, a faint red halo came into view. This made Lin happy again. He dug about half a foot deeper, and a mottled red stone was dug out. The rock was the size of a fist and had a craggy surface. There was a fiery red color in the middle that was rather eye-catching. Lin Sun raised his knife and cut the stone into pieces. Soon there was only a thumb-sized piece of fire copper left in his palm. The surface of the fire core copper seemed to be enshrouded in mist, and it was bright red and beautiful. Even though it was merely the size of a thumb, it was heavy and actually weighed around 3 kilograms. As expected, the Feiyun fire copper in the mine hadn't been fully excavated. Lin Sun smiled. Just a casual glance. He noticed that the rock wall was quite dry, quite different from the cold and humid environment around. This abnormality made his heart skip a beat, and he guessed some of the reasons. Thus, he started to dig into the rock wall, and sure enough, he found this thing. This was an unexpected surprise. Feiyun fire copper was a kind of spiritual material used to refine weapons. By tempering it with refined steel, the weapon forged would be extremely sharp, flexible, and hard. If the spiritual tattoo formation of fire property could be inscribed on it, the weapon would be more powerful. In terms of value, although Feiyun fire copper was not as expensive as blood marrow grit, it was more popular among practitioners. Blood marrow grit, Feiyun fire copper vein. Lin Sun took a deep breath to calm himself down. In the end, he didn't continue to excavate the Feiyun fire copper, but returned along the mine path. He was very clear that it was unrealistic for him to dig out all the Feiyun fire copper ores in the mine by himself. Therefore, he had to discuss this matter with the village head, Shirao Tianren. Lin Sun was not a greedy person. Now that he lived in Feiyun village, he owed Shirao Tianren a lot of favors, so he must return the favor. It wasn't until the afternoon that Lin Sun returned to the village alone with the cloth bag of blood marrow grit on his shoulder. However, just as his figure appeared at the entrance of the village, a little kid who was playing at the side let out a loud cry and turned around to run into the village. "He's back. Uncle Lin's son is back. He's not dead." The childish voice was full of surprise. Lin Sun was in a daze and felt a little puzzled. He stepped forward quickly and walked in a hurry. Not long after, he saw a group of people coming towards him in a mighty manner. The leader was Shirao Tianren, and the others were all villagers. In the crowd, Lin Sun could see Pockmark's son being tied up by Zhou Zhong and others and escorted like a prisoner. In an instant, Lin Sun vaguely understood. He immediately went forward and cupped his hands to Shirao Tianren with a smile. "Uncle Shirao." Shirao Tianren, who was full of anxiety, felt relieved when he saw Lin Sun came back unscathed. He smiled and asked, "Is it settled?" Lin Sun nodded with a smile. He knew Shirao Tianren was asking about Qian Shi and Lu Ting. Shirao Tianren let out a long breath and patted Lin Sun's shoulder hard, saying, "Good. Well done, well done." Seeing this scene, the other villagers all understood that Qian Shi and Lu Ting might not be able to come back in this lifetime. For a moment, they all looked at Lin Sun with a touch of shock. Qian Shi was a practitioner at the 3rd level of martial realm, but he was no match for Lin Sun. This was too shocking. At this time, Shirao Tianren pointed at Pockmark's son who was tied up and said, "Pockmark's son has confessed to what happened today. What are you going to do with him?" Pockmark's son's face was bruised and swollen, and he looked dispirited. Hearing this, he cried with a sad face, "I was forced to do this." Qian Shi said that if I didn't agree, they would kill my 3-year-old son. I had no choice. In the end, he couldn't help but burst into tears. Many villagers couldn't bear it. Pockmark's son was honest and dull. It was impossible for him to conspire with Qian Shi and Lu Ting to kill Lin Sun. Glancing at the villagers, Lin Sun understood and said with a smile, "This has nothing to do with Brother Sunday. He was forced to do this. Please let him go, Uncle Shirao." Shirao Tianren let out a sigh of relief. Of course he knew the whole story. Seeing that Lin Sun didn't intend to pursue the matter, he didn't insist and wave his hand to let Pockmark's son go. Thank you, Brother Lin's son." Pockmark's son was so excited that he didn't know what to do. He was about to kneel down and kowtow, but Lin Sun stopped him and comforted him. "Well, Lin Sun is back safely. You can go now." Shirao Tianren waved his hand. In the courtyard of Lin Sun's house. While eating, Lin Sun told Shirao Tianren what had happened today, but he didn't mention the discovery of Feiyun fire copper. Hearing all this, Shirao Tianren looked at the 13-year-old boy who was concentrating on eating in front of him. He sighed with emotion and couldn't help feeling shocked. Qian Shi had traveled far and wide, and had rich experience in bloody battles. He was a master second only to Lien Rufeng, but now he was killed by Lin Sun, who was one level lower than him. How strong was Lin Sun's fighting capacity? More importantly, it was not only Qian Shi, but also Lu Ting who attacked Lin Sun. Lin Sun and Lu Ting still couldn't defeat Lin Sun, which showed how strong Lin Sun was. Could it be that Lin Sun was a genius with excellent aptitude in the cultivation world? Shirao Tianren couldn't calm himself down for a long time. If Lin Sun hadn't confirmed it himself, he wouldn't have believed it. Uncle Shirao, when I entered the abandoned mine tunnel in the hinterland of the Smoking Mountain, I found something unexpected. After eating, Lin Sun picked up the bag next to him. With a clatter, a pile of blood marrow grits appeared on the table. They were snow-white and looked like crescent moons made of sand. Shirao Tianren was confused. What's this? Lin Sun was in a daze, but soon realized that Shirao Tianren didn't recognize it. He explained patiently, "This is the blood marrow grit, the fangs shed by the red blood bats. It's a valuable spiritual material for cultivation." Shirao Tianren didn't recognize blood marrow grits, but he knew about ruddy blood bats. He couldn't help gasping and asked in shock, "You met ruddy blood bats?" In Shirao Tianren's memory, ruddy blood bats were bloodthirsty monsters. More than half of the slaves who excavated the Feiyun fire copper mine were killed by them. That was why no villager dared to approach the abandoned mine tunnel all these years, because they knew ruddy blood bats lived there. Lin Sun smiled. "Don't worry, Uncle Shirao. I've killed all those animals." "Killed all of them?" Shirao Tianren was shocked and felt a little dizzy. After a while, he said with a bitter smile, "Don't blame me for losing my composure. What happened today really surprised me." Lin Sun understood. Although Shirao Tianren was the village head, he was just an ordinary person who didn't know how to cultivate. In his eyes, there was no difference between ruddy blood bats and demons. After calming down, Shirao Tianren said, "Put away the blood marrow grits quickly. You're the only practitioner in Feiyun village now, so you can't take them out and let others waste them." It could be seen from his words that Shirao Tianren didn't regard Lien Rufeng and others who were still in other places as his own people. At the same time, Shirao Tianren's behavior proved that he really cared about Lin Sun. If it were someone else, he would have asked for a share of the blood marrow grits after hearing its amazing value. But Shirao Tianren didn't, which meant he already regarded Lin Sun as his own people. Lin Sun didn't refuse, and because of Shirao Tianren's words, he immediately made a decision. "Uncle Shirao, there's another good news." Lin Sun took out the thumb-sized piece of Feiyun fire copper and handed it to Shirao Tianren. "I found a vein of Feiyun fire copper that hasn't been excavated yet." Puff! Shirao Tianren spat out the tea in his mouth, dumbfounded. He had been shocked too many times today. Chapter 31. After the shock, Shirao Tianren was overjoyed. He knew clearly what an unexcavated Feiyun fire copper meant. He also knew what amazing changes it could bring to the whole Feiyun village if he could control it. In the past, there was nothing in Feiyun village. They could only exchange some meager living materials by selling spiritual grains, which could barely meet the villagers' needs of food and clothing. But if they sold Feiyun fire copper, the villagers would become rich and no longer have to worry about their livelihood. Moreover, with sufficient material support, the children in the village would be able to study, learn to read, and even embark on the true path of cultivation. They would be able to wander about in the flourishing and prosperous cities, and they wouldn't have to be like their fathers who could only live in a remote and desolate village and endure the pain of poverty. "Uncle Shirao, I want to ask you to mobilize all the villagers to excavate Feiyun fire copper together. We will have a share of the wealth we get from selling the ore." Lin Sun said quickly. Shirao Tianren was so excited that his face turned red. After a long while, he gritted his teeth and said, "No, you found the ore vein, so the wealth is yours. I can mobilize all the villagers to help you excavate the ore, and you only need to pay them a salary." Lin Sun shook his head. "This is the commonwealth of Feiyun village. I just found it. I can't do that, or I'd rather not have the wealth." His words were calm, but extremely resolute. Shirao Tianren stared at Lin Sun for a long time and said, Ew. Do you know how amazing the value of a Feiyun fire copper is? He picked up the thumb-sized piece of Feiyun fire copper on the table and said, such a small piece of treasure could be sold for 30 imperial copper coins more than 100 years ago. If we sell in the city, we will get even more copper coins. Speaking of this, he took a deep breath. The market price was more than 100 years ago. The value will only be higher now. You really want to do that? Lin Sun was a little surprised by the value of Feiyun fire copper, but he nodded without hesitation and said, yes, I will. He was an orphan who grew up with Master Lu. At the age of 13, the mine prison where he lived was destroyed and Master Lu's life and death were unknown. He had to come to the territory of Xiao Empire alone. Feiyun village was his first home in Xiao Empire. Shirao Tenrun, the village head, and all the villagers treated him as one of their own. Under such circumstances, how could Lin Sun care about the wealth contained in a piece of Feiyun fire copper? Compared with these worldly possessions, Lin Sun cared more about the kindness of Feiyun village. At this point, Shirao Tianren no longer regarded Lin Sun as a junior. Even though Lin Sun was only 13 years old, his wisdom was far beyond that of an ordinary adult. What's more, Lin Sun was a spiritual apprentice who was proficient in inscribing and a practitioner with strong combat power. Shirao Tianren asked himself, if Lien Rufeng had found the Feiyun fire copper, he would not have shared it with anyone else. Compared with Lin Sun, Shirao Tianren appreciated Lin Sun more and even had an inexplicable respect for him. It was not easy for him, an old man who had lived for more than half of his life, to respect a 13-year-old boy. Shirao Tianren stopped persuading Lin Sun. After Lin Sun made up his mind, Shirao Tianren began to think about how to mobilize the villagers to excavate the Feiyun fire copper. At this time, Lin Sun suddenly said, Uncle Shirao, it's not urgent. It's not too late to announce the news after we solve some hidden dangers in the village. Hidden dangers? Shirao Tianren was shocked, but he soon realized what Lin Sun meant. His face became serious. Indeed, Lin Sun had killed Lu Ting and Qian Qi. If Lien Rufeng and his men came back one day, they would not let it go easily. It was obvious. For the entire Feiyun village, Lien Rufeng and his men were a great threat. Shirao Tianren had noticed a few days ago that Lien Rufeng and his men must be planning something against Feiyun village. If they returned to the village successfully, Lin Sun would not be the only one who would be threatened. Even the villagers would be in danger. Shirao Tianren frowned. Lin Sun, what do you think we should do? Lien Rufeng was very powerful at the 4th level of martial realm. He was accompanied by a group of guards. The villagers were no match for him at all. Lin Sun pondered, Uncle Shirao, I want to know what the villagers think of Lien Rufeng and his men. After all, they used to be a member of the village. If we really want to deal with them, we have to consider the villagers' opinion. This was indeed a problem. Although Lien Rufeng and his men were increasingly rampant and coveted the wealth of the village, without their help to transport goods to the Green Sun tribe to exchange for supplies, the villagers of Feiyun would not be able to live on. In other words, the villagers of Feiyun had to rely on Lien Rufeng and his men if they wanted to survive. This was the reason why Lien Rufeng and his men dared to be so arrogant. Shirao thought for a while and made no attempt to hide his disgust. In recent years, as the supplies brought back by Lien Rufeng and his men have become less and less, we have long hated them to the core. But in order to survive, we have to swallow our anger. Speaking of this, Shirao Tianren couldn't help sighing. The most important thing is that everyone is worried about who will replace Lien Rufeng and go to the Green Sun tribe to exchange goods if they are gone. Hearing this, Lin Sun felt much more relaxed. He smiled. That's easy. After we deal with Lien Rufeng and his men, I will help you solve the problem of living supplies. Shirao Tianren cheered up. Lin Sun, you want to know how sure you are to deal with Lien Rufeng and his men? Lin Sun didn't answer directly, but smiled. Uncle Shirao, leave it to me. You don't have to worry about it. The smile on Lin's fair and delicate face was calm. Under the sunshine, he was shrouded in an indescribable confidence, which unconsciously influenced Shirao Tianren and swept away all the hesitation in his heart. He said decisively, "That's settled then." That night, Lin Sun sat alone at the desk, looking at the dense stars outside the window, lost in thought. Now that he had cured the remaining injuries in his body, his cultivation was no longer hindered, and he had gained the heaven-accessing place. He was full of confidence for his future cultivation. Under such circumstances, it seemed unnecessary for him to stay in Feiyun Village. "After I solve the problem of Feiyun Village, I can go on my way. Master Lu, who was the enemy who dug away my spiritual vein? Where is he hiding in Xiao Empire?" Lin Sun had known for a long time that he was an abandoned baby, and he didn't expect to find out who his parents were. But Master Lu's words made him realize that if he could find the person who dug away his spiritual vein, he might get some clues about his parents. Of course, Lin Sun was not interested in finding his parents. He didn't want to know why the enemy dug away his spiritual vein. Because of this, he almost died. Even if he survived, it was almost impossible for him to cultivate. How could Lin Sun not hate him? He had to avenge himself. Even without Master Lu's order, he would go and find out the truth. Why? Why did he dig away the spiritual vein that belonged to him? After pondering for a long time, Lin Sun took a deep breath and sealed the hatred in his heart. He grew up in the dark and bloody mine prison, so he knew very well that it was never easy for a person to take revenge. Besides, Master Lu's words only let him know that the murderer was in Xiao Empire. How could it be easy for him to take revenge? Xiao Empire was so big. Who was the name of the murderer? What did he look like? What status or cultivation did he have? Lin Sun knew none of these, but he was not in a hurry. He had enough patience. As long as he kept searching, he would realize it one day. Of course, the premise was that he not only had to survive in Xiao Empire, but also become very powerful. After dealing with Qian Shi and Lu Ting, Lin Sun's life returned to peace in the following days. He spent the rest of his time on cultivation except teaching the children in the village martial arts. 3 days later, all the spiritual grains in the village had ripened. The villagers all set out to harvest the spiritual grains day and night. On this day, Lin Sun made another breakthrough after more than 2 years of stagnation. His cultivation reached the 3rd level of martial realm, mansion opening. This breakthrough was not intentional, but a natural one. It was like a teacup that was filled to the brim with water, and the water naturally overflowed. This kind of breakthrough also proved that Lin Sun's cultivation foundation was strong and solid, which was absolutely outstanding and far beyond the ordinary. Mansion opening opened the meridians of the 5 internal organs. Among the 5 internal organs of the human body, the liver was wood, the heart was fire, the spleen was earth, the lung was metal, and the kidney was water, which corresponded to the 5 elements. Therefore, this level was also called opening the 5 elements. At this level, the spiritual energy around the practitioner could run in the 5 internal organs, wash them, nourish the meridians, and repeat endlessly. For example, Qi guiding, the first level of martial realm, allowed the spiritual energy to run in the body for 9 cycles. The second level, inner strong, allowed the spiritual energy to run in the body for 18 cycles. And the third level, mansion opening, allowed the spiritual energy to run in the body for 36 cycles. The number of spiritual energy cycles indicated the strength of the spiritual energy and the endurance of the fighting power. Anyway, after 2 years, Lin Sun's cultivation finally broke through. Chapter 32. In the training field in the center of Feiyun Village, under the light of Venus dawn, a group of children were practicing marching boxing with a serious look on their faces. Their movements were skillful and methodical. Compared to the past, the marching boxing performed by the children in the village had a more condensed flavor. It was big and powerful. Lin Sun, who was supervising the children, couldn't help nodding to himself. In the past, the children's marching boxing was scattered in both form and spirit, so they neglected many skills of exerting force. If they kept practicing it, they would inevitably go astray. But now it was different. After Lin Sun's guidance and correction, the children had begun to master the essence of marching boxing. Lin Sun once speculated maliciously that Lien Rufeng and other escorts didn't pay attention to teaching the children martial arts at all. Otherwise, with their eyesight, how could they not be able to see the flaws in it? On the other side of the training field, four children were sitting cross-legged in meditation. Among them was Ing Luer, the son of Ing Hao. These four children were all 7 or 8 years old, and their aptitudes were slightly higher than other children's. Now, they could already sense qi and could draw qi into their bodies. As long as they slowly trained, they would be able to step into the ranks of true cultivators. Lin Sun didn't hide anything from them. He taught them the spirit concentrating manual one by one and took out some flesh and blood of snowspot leopard and one-horned lizard to help them strengthen their bodies and replenish their spiritual energy. This was also for the future development of Feiyun Village. Lin Sun knew that if Lien Rufeng and the other escorts were eliminated one day, Feiyun Village would lose all its escorts. Besides, Lin Sun couldn't stay in Feiyun Village all the time. Under such circumstances, someone was urgently needed to protect the whole village on behalf of Lien Rufeng and the other escorts. Ing Luer and the other 3 were chosen by Lin Sun. Before leaving, Lin Sun would teach them as much as he could about the cultivation experience he had mastered. As for the future, it was up to them to make great efforts. Lin Sun didn't stay idle while supervising the children. He held a cyan wooden saber in his hand, and without using spiritual energy, he was practicing the 6-word saber play with the strength of his muscles. Swish! A small willow leaf floated down. With a flash of the blade, the willow leaf was chopped off. This was originally very normal, and almost any other shoujo could do it, but if one looked closely, they would find that the way the willow leaf was split was very particular. Because this saber followed a curved vein on the willow leaf, it was not a straight line. In other words, Lin's saber was not only as fast as lightning, but also precisely split along a vein on the willow leaf. The willow leaf was fine, the blade was as sharp as lightning, and he only used the strength of his wrist. Yet, he was able to achieve this. If it was seen by those with high cultivation, they would probably not be stingy with their praises. This was minute subtlety. Martial Tao was also divided into 4 stages. First glimpse, minute subtlety, accuracy, and perfection. Take the marching fist as an example. If one was able to display the moves one by one at the beginning, it would be considered to be at the first glimpse level. As the saying goes, practice makes perfect. Once one could begin to comprehend the essence of a move, it could be called the minute subtlety level. On top of this foundation, the essence of the move could be displayed, and it could be called precision. As for the perfection level, it was to thoroughly comprehend all the mysteries of marching fist and give full play to its power. Once one attained this realm, every single move was smooth like flowing water, and it was entirely possible for one to grasp it at one's fingertips. Moreover, the combat strength one brought forth was extremely formidable. These were the 4 stages of general combat cultivation methods. Now Lin Sun had practiced marching boxing to the level of precision, and only one step was needed to perfect it. This was quite normal. After all, this was a basic boxing method, which didn't have high requirements for practitioners. However, it was not so easy to practice a simple boxing method to the perfection level. This required a kind of understanding. After all, the personalities of the practitioners in the world were different, and the spiritual power they cultivated was different. The style of the marching boxing they displayed was also different. If they wanted to reach the perfect level, they must find their own style. However, most of the shoujo in the world wouldn't waste time on a basic martial art. The reason why it was called a basic martial art was that its power was limited, and it wasn't worth much effort to figure it out. But for Lin Sun, marching fist was the only boxing method he had mastered, and he had no other choice. Under such circumstances, he naturally had to spend more time to practice this martial art. In his view, even if it was a basic boxing method, as long as it could be practiced to the perfection level, its power would be beyond imagination. For example, a high-level martial art was like an iron sword, and a basic martial art was like a wooden sword. A wooden sword was definitely not as powerful as an iron sword, but the key was who used it. In the hands of a master, a wooden sword could also kill people, but in the hands of an ordinary person, no matter how sharp an iron sword was, it would be useless. To reach the perfection level of marching fist, one needed a kind of understanding which couldn't be rushed. Now Lin Sun focused more on practicing six-word saber play. This saber play was indeed unique and powerful beyond imagination, but it was also more difficult to practice than usual. For example, Lin Sun could only reach nuance, far from accuracy, let alone the perfection level. This was what he had learned from fighting with red blood bats. Otherwise, it would be impossible for him to reach the nuanced level of six-word saber play under normal circumstances. It was also this incident that made Lin Sun realize that no matter how much he practiced the saber play, it was the same as building a car behind closed doors. Only through actual combat could he have a deep understanding of the essence of the saber play. I must find a chance to go to that deep forest again. It would be even better if I could encounter some fierce beasts to practice my saber play. An idea came to Lin Sun's mind. Actual combat could not only improve one's martial arts, but also improve one's perseverance, courage, and experience. A practitioner who didn't know how to fight was doomed to be unable to go further on the road of cultivation. After 7 days of hard work, all the spiritual grains planted in Feiyun village were harvested. A rough calculation showed that there were about 6,000 caddies of spiritual grains. Although it was a little less than in previous years, the villagers were satisfied. They all knew that it was absolutely worth celebrating to be able to harvest so many spiritual grains after the disaster of insects. Because of Lin Sun's meritorious deed in clearing the pests, every household in the village gave him a lot of spiritual grains, which added up to nearly 100 caddies. In the past, these harvested spiritual grains would be sent to Green Sun tribe thousands of miles away as goods to be exchanged for daily necessities. But this time, no one intended to do so, for the villagers now understood the reason. Although they were worried about whether Lin Sun could make it, they didn't oppose the decision of the village head, Shirao Tianren. The peaceful days went on. Unknowingly, it had been nearly a month since Lin Sun killed Lu Ting and Qian Qi. In addition to teaching martial arts to the children in the village, Lin Sun spent most of his time on cultivation. After this period of practice, Lin Sun's cultivation of viscera opening, the third level of martial realm, had become extremely profound, and his fighting capacity was more than twice as strong as before. If he met Qian Qi now, he could easily kill him with one strike. The cultivation of meditating magic was also very effective, making Lin Sun's spirit more condensed and powerful. He was only one step away from lighting up a star in his sea of consciousness. Even so, the strength of his spirit brought great benefits to Lin Sun. At least he wouldn't feel any discomfort or fatigue, even if he only rested for 6 hours a day, which saved Lin Sun a lot of time imperceptibly. Moreover, the strength of his spirit made it much easier for him to practice and comprehend the six-word saber play. This change made Lin Sun quite happy, and he became more aware of the uniqueness of meditating magic. In addition to practicing cultivation and martial arts, Lin Sun didn't neglect the cultivation of spiritual tattoos. He would certainly spare some time every day to practice the speed, strength, and skills of inscribing spiritual tattoos. The only regret was that Lin Sun still lacked a handy inscribing pen after the disappearance of the dark gray inscribing pen along with the ancient scroll. Otherwise, with some spiritual materials he collected, he could smelt some spiritual ink and inscribe some real spiritual tattoos. Unable to inscribe real spiritual tattoos meant that he couldn't really feel his current level of inscribing spiritual tattoos, and he didn't know how far he was from a spiritual tattooist. But Lin Sun wasn't in a hurry. The cultivation of spiritual tattoos couldn't be done overnight. It depended on the accumulation of practice, comprehension, and progress over time. There was no shortcut. Of course, whether it was cultivation, martial arts, spiritual tattoos, or the cultivation of soul, they were all progressing well, which made Lin Sun very satisfied. But as time went by, the villagers of Feiyun were not as relaxed as Lin Sun. They all knew very well that the day when Lien Ruffin and his companions would come back was getting closer and closer, and they might appear in Feiyun one day. This caused the emotions of all the villagers to become much more nervous and depressed. Although they weren't gloomy, they weren't as relaxed as before. Lin Sun couldn't do anything about it. What would come would come. The most urgent thing was to think about how to deal with it. One morning, after washing up, Lin Sun left home and headed straight out of the village with a bone bow and a bag of arrows on his back and the sky breacher on his waist. In the past month, the flesh of the snow-spot leopard and the one-horned lizard had been eaten up. It was impossible to fill his stomach with spiritual grains. Therefore, Lin Sun decided to go to the deep forest again for the sake of filling his stomach and the needs of cultivation in the future. This time, Lin Sun set out alone, without Zhou Zhong and other hunters. This was also for the sake of safety. Last time, when they entered the deep forest, if Lin Sun hadn't been vigilant, they would have met the lava wolf, which they had never met, and the consequences would have been unimaginable. But Lin Sun didn't know that the lava wolf, which he regarded as a terrible threat, had already been killed by a mysterious girl. Chapter 33. Whoosh! In the morning wind, Lin Sun's figure was vigorous as if he was flying. In just 1 month, Lin Sun's thin and weak body had become much taller. He was thin and dignified, full of energy and strength. His slightly childish face was no longer pale, and it had an extra sense of clarity and carefreeness. All of this had something to do with his hard work. Coupled with the daily consumption of the spirit-quenching liquid and the flesh of the snow-spot leopard and the one-horned lizard, he seemed to have been reborn. He was like a completely different person from before. At the 3rd level of martial realm, one could run as fast as flying. With the support of the spiritual energy in his body, he wouldn't feel tired even if he ran for more than 2 hours. This was as fast as a galloping horse and as agile as a tiger or a leopard. When Xiuzhe reached the mansion opening level, they could all do this. It took only a quarter of an hour to reach the place where it used to take more than 2 hours in the past. The vast ancient forest came into view again. Lin Sun took off the white bone longbow on his back and pulled out a foot-long black arrow from the quiver. Then he jumped and disappeared in the dark forest. A moment later, bang! A stream of energy violently shot out like a bolt of lightning and fiercely collided with the body of Striped Tiger, causing its enormous body to be sent flying and fall a few meters away. Fresh blood sprayed out, and it let out a shrill cry before it died. At the same time, a figure jumped down from a tree in the distance and quickly came to the corpse of the Striped Tiger. He was dignified and thin, with sharp eyebrows and a huge white bone longbow in his hand. It was Lin Sun. The white bone longbow in his hand was made of the spine of the snow-spot leopard and a long tendon of the one-horned lizard. After many days of polishing and tanning, it was so strong that it couldn't be pulled open without the strength of more than 50 kilograms. In order to make this bow, Lin Sun spent a lot of time and effort. For example, he refined the bowstring with the powder of Feiyun fire copper mixed with several spiritual materials for 7 days, which made it so tough that ordinary knives and swords couldn't cut it. Such a strong bow, of course, should be matched with special arrows. The 4 ink-colored arrows in Lin Sun's quiver were all made from the leg bones of one-horned lizards. They were not only sharp but also harder than refined steel, and each of them weighed half a kilogram. When Lin Sun was a child, Master Lu told him that ordinary weapons might not be suitable for him to practice, but he could choose bows and arrows as his weapon, knowing that he was too weak to fight for a long time. Archery was about concentrating all the strength in one's body and killing with a single strike. It was undoubtedly the best choice for those who were weak and unable to fight for long periods of time. From then on, Lin Sun began to practice archery and fell in love with this kind of arrow power that could kill with one shot. Although he had been reborn and was totally different from the past, Lin Sun would not abandon the bow and arrow. Sometimes it was easier to kill an opponent with a bow and arrow, such as a surprise attack or long-range attack. It could also better protect one's own safety. If one sensed that the situation was not right, one could turn around and leave without being entangled by the opponent. In short, although Lin Sun's fighting skills were simple, they were extremely comprehensive. He could use bows and arrows for long-range attacks, and use sabers and fists for close-range attacks, which complemented each other. However, Lin Sun knew that it would be better if he could get another body movement for escaping. It was a pity that Master Lu did not seem to be good at it, so he never taught Lin Sun. Puff! Lin Sun raised his hand and pulled out the arrow from Ban Wenhu's body. Then, he quickly covered the corpse of the striped tiger with the fish-blocking grass he had prepared in advance to cover the smell of blood. Then, he used the slender and flexible grieving ghost vines to wrap around the striped tiger's carcass and hid the spoils of war in a nearby lush bush. The striped tiger was a fierce beast, even more powerful than the snow-spot leopard. But it was no longer a threat to Lin Sun now. After making a mark nearby, Lin Sun continued to walk into the depths of the forest without hesitation. Before long, the forest in the distance shook violently. Lin Sun's figure flashed, and he climbed up a nearby tree. He drew his bow and put an arrow on it, ready to fight. Just by listening to the sound, Lin Sun knew a big guy was running towards him. Sure enough, a huge figure of a three-horned bull rushed towards him with rumbling steps, knocking down all the ancient trees along the way. It was extremely fierce. Lin Sun's heart tightened. This was a terrible beast that could kill a practitioner at the 5th level of martial realm. It was so powerful and ferocious that even tigers and leopards would flee at the sight of it. But soon, Lin Sun found that something was wrong. The three-horned bull was obviously running away in a panic, as if it was afraid of something. Lin Sun finally decided not to take action. This fierce beast was still a great threat to him now. Unless he had no other choice, Lin Sun would not joke about his life. Fortunately, the three-horned bull only cared about running away and didn't notice Lin Sun hiding in the tree. Soon, it disappeared without a trace. Lin Sun was about to set off again when he suddenly felt an inexplicable fear. Almost at the same time, there were bursts of beast roars in the forest from all directions. It seemed that all the fierce beasts hiding in the forest were alarmed by something at this moment, and their roars were full of horror. Rumble, the earth began to tremble violently. The ancient trees trembled, and their branches and leaves rustled. If one were to look down from the sky, they would be able to see that in every area of the ancient forest, wild beasts, ferocious beasts, and ferocious beasts were fleeing madly. They formed a torrent that knocked down and crushed the towering trees along the way. What happened? At this moment, Lin Sun also realized that something was wrong. He put away his bow and arrow and climbed to the top of the tree in a flash. Looking into the distance, he saw a battle taking place in the far distance. It was a black bear that was over 100 m tall like a small mountain, and it roared towards the sky with a voice that was like a thunderclap. With a slap of its palm, it shattered numerous ancient trees, and it practically possessed the might to overturn the heavens and the earth. Its eyes were like a pair of lanterns, and its fur was shining with black light. Its evil spirit was soaring to the sky. Looking at it from a distance, Lin Sun felt a sense of oppression and suffocation. Fierce bear. According to the Atlas of all spirits, this kind of fierce beast could be called the overlord of the mountain. Its strength was so great that it could destroy mountains and tear a strong practitioner of Gang Spirit realm alive. The opponent of the fierce bear was a tall and burly figure with dazzling golden light all over his body. Lin Sun couldn't see his face clearly because of the distance. What made Lin Sun's heart tremble was that the tall figure was not afraid of the attack of the fierce bear at all. The figure wandered in the void and suppressed the fierce bear with only a pair of fists, making it unable to raise its head and roar again and again. The figure could fly in the air and completely suppress a fierce bear that was strong enough to kill a strong practitioner of Gang Spirit realm. The tall figure must be a strong practitioner of Sea Spirit realm. Only a strong practitioner of Sea Spirit realm had the ability to fly in the air. Realizing this, Lin Sun couldn't help but be shocked. How could a strong practitioner of Sea Spirit realm suddenly appear in the barren 3,000 mountains? Boom! Before Lin Sun could figure it out, with a loud bang, The ancient tree under his feet was suddenly knocked down, making Lin Sun stagger and fall to the ground. Lin Sun reacted quickly. He twisted his body in the air, tiptoed on the branch, and landed safely on the ground like a hawk turning over. Gee! At this moment, Lin Sun saw a little girl of 6 or 7 years old rushing to him not far away. She wore an animal skin skirt, revealing a pair of bare feet as white as lotus roots. Her long black hair fluttered because of running at a high speed, revealing a beautiful face with picturesque eyebrows. Seeing Lin Sun, the little girl was obviously stunned and then immediately became anxious. She babbled, as if telling Lin Sun to run away quickly. Lin Sun also knew that the situation was not good, so he nodded. When he was about to say thank you, he felt a blur in front of him. The little girl rushed to him, grabbed his clothes with one hand, and rushed to the distance. A little girl of 5 or 6 years old, whose height was not even as high as Lin Sun's chest, now carried Lin Sun as easily as carrying a chick, which shocked Lin Sun. What surprised Lin Sun most was that from the beginning to the end, he had no time to dodge and was caught. Whoosh, whoosh, the sound of the wind swept past his ears, and Lin Sun also realized that the little girl seemed to have no evil intentions, so he secretly breathed a sigh of relief. Immediately, his heart was in turmoil. He was now at the 3rd level of martial realm, but the little girl could carry him so easily. Was her cultivation much higher than his? Rumble. Soon, Lin Sun had no time to think about it. In his field of vision, he saw the forest collapsed one after another along the way, and all kinds of fierce beasts fled for their lives. It was turbulent and chaotic. In this case, he really had to leave here as soon as possible to save his life. Soon, the little girl rushed out of the forest with Lin Sun. After arriving here, Lin Sun couldn't help saying, "Little girl, please." His voice stopped abruptly, because at this moment, a golden light suddenly pierced the sky from afar. Boom! Almost at the same time, a fist wind with terrible spiritual power fell from the sky, tearing the void and smashing towards the little girl. The little girl seemed to be able to predict the future. Her figure flashed, and she took Lin Sun to dodge to the side. However, the fist wind was unexpectedly powerful, smashing a big pit on the ground. The terrible aftermath of the fist spread, shaking the little girl's small and delicate body, and then she fell to the ground with Lin Sun. How horrible! Lin Sun's pupils shrank, but before he could react, another fist wind with dazzling golden light had broken through the air. One punch after another. Lin Sun could not avoid it even if he had the power of Gang Spirit Realm. Not to mention that he was only at the 3rd level of Martial Realm. It was so terrible that it was impossible to resist this sudden attack. However, at this critical moment, Lin Sun only heard a voice suddenly exploding in his ears. How dare a mere barbarian to be presumptuous in the territory of Xiao Empire? You're courting death. Every word resounded through the world like thunder. Lin Sun only felt dizzy in front of his eyes, and then he and the little girl were rolled up by an unparalleled force. They narrowly avoided the killing of the terrible fist and fell on the open space dozens of meters away. At this time, Lin Sun saw clearly that under the blue sky, there was a man in a cyan robe, with his hair in a bun and sleeves fluttering in the wind. He was standing on a blue long sword with pine patterns. Chapter 34. Another Sea Spirit Realm practitioner? Seeing the immortal-like man standing on the sword, Lin Sun was both shocked and grateful. If the man hadn't saved him in time, he and the little girl would have been killed. At the same time, Lin Sun finally saw who the murderer was. It was a man with an abnormally robust and mighty figure. The muscles on his entire body glowed with a light golden color, and they were as hard as rocks. They were filled with explosive power. His beard and hair were like spears, and his eyes were like lightning. Standing there casually, his momentum seemed to be connected with the sky, towering and powerful like a mountain. It took a long time to describe, but in fact it happened very fast. From the moment the man appeared, the blue pine-patterned sword under his feet made a buzzing sound and broke through the air. Whoosh! The sword light was like a rainbow, chopping down from the sky. At that moment, Lin Sun felt a stinging pain in his eyes. The sword chi was so strong that it was like the scorching sun in the sky, intending to destroy the world. Almost at the same time, the strong man also moved. With a loud shout, his fist wrapped in blazing golden light whizzed out. Boom! The sky and the earth shook, the clouds cracked, and the force spread by the collision of spiritual power swept across, making the world pale. This scene was too horrible. How could the fight between two top overmatches with the strength of Sea Spirit Realm be child's play? There had always been a saying in Xiao Empire that once the overmatches of Sea Spirit Realm took action, it would be like a disaster sweeping across, destined to cause unimaginable disasters. Now, although this duel didn't take place in a densely populated city, the destructive power caused by turned the rocks and trees within a radius of 300 meters into powder, and the earth cracked like a spiderweb. Some fierce beasts that didn't escape in time even had time to scream before their flesh and blood burst, and they died on the spot. Such a shocking scene made Lin Sun dare not look at it anymore. He rolled over, shielded the little girl under his body, and ran all his strength to protect himself. The gap was too big. Lin Sun was only at the 3rd level of Martial Realm. In the face of the duel of Sea Spirit Realm, it was difficult for him to resist, let alone escape. His life and death were no longer in his control. Now Lin Sun could only pray that the battle would end soon. Rumble, the battle was fierce, and the sound of collision was like thunder, shaking the field, making Lin Sun's eardrums stinging, his blood and spirit rolling, and his soul agitated. He was so uncomfortable that he almost coughed up blood. He didn't dare to think too much. Almost subconsciously, he operated the star circulation of meditating magic. His mind and spirit were as one, and he visualized the secret of stars shining in the sky and circulating in the sky. Soon, his soul stopped throbbing, and his consciousness became ethereal. All the negative emotions receded like the tide, no longer existing. Suddenly, Lin Sun found that although he couldn't see, the surrounding scene was clearly presented in his mind. Beneath the sky, the jade-robed young man's clothes fluttered while a sky-blue ancient sword that was swift and fierce like a bolt of lightning whistled through the air like a dragon, and it emanated ghastly sword chi that covered the sky. On the other hand, the mighty man in front of him seemed to be in an extremely sorry state. His skin that was hard like rock was covered in sword scars while fresh blood flowed from them. Especially his fists, the skin and flesh on them had actually split open, and ghastly white bones were faintly visible. However, even if his entire body was covered in injuries, this mighty man actually didn't notice it at all, and his imposing aura was still heavy, murderous, and peerlessly ferocious. Sword manipulation. Suddenly, the green-robed young man seemed to be a little impatient. He let out a long roar, and the momentum of the blue ancient sword changed abruptly. Whoosh! Like a flash of lightning that cut through the darkness, it disappeared in a flash. This sword was incredibly fast, and Lin Sun couldn't even capture the trace of this sword in his mind. Immediately, the mighty man let out a muffled groan. One of his arms was cut off, and blood splashed in the sky. Horizontal sword manipulation. The green-robed young man's momentum became more and more powerful, just like a legendary sword immortal who could turn the world upside down with his sword. Obviously, he wanted to take this opportunity to kill the mighty man in one fell swoop. Screech! At this critical moment, above the sky, a huge, ferocious bird swooped down, and its wings were like knives, cutting the clouds apart. Its whole body was golden, as if it was made of gold. When it spread its wings, it was more than 30 meters long. Its speed was also unbelievably fast. Like a bolt of lightning, it was like a phantom. In an instant, it had rescued the mighty man. The green-robed young man was caught off guard by this sudden change. When he was about to chase after the golden, ferocious bird, it had already disappeared in the distant sky. Dark species, golden ray condor. The green-robed young man said unwillingly, I didn't expect that the voodoo barbarian would come from there. The battle was over. Lin Sun couldn't care less about the voodoo barbarian or the golden ray condor. When the battle was over, he couldn't help but let out a long sigh. Only then did he feel a burning pain on his back. When he touched it with his hand, he found that it was bloody. Obviously, he had suffered a flesh wound in the battle just now. Fortunately, it was just a flesh wound, and his muscles and bones were not hurt. He pulled the little girl up. Seeing that the little girl was covered with dirt and was not hurt, he was a little relieved. "Are you all right?" The green-robed young man came over. This area was already full of scars, and traces of battle were everywhere. Lin Sun hurriedly saluted and said, "Thank you for saving us." Only now did he notice that this green-robed man was actually rather young, handsome, and confident. Moreover, every single move he made revealed an innate and noble aura. "It's good that you are all right. I didn't expect that there were voodoo barbarians in the 3,000 mountains. Did they also come for the peerless treasure?" The green-robed young man sighed, as if he was talking to himself. "Peerless treasure?" Lin Sun was stunned. "You should go now." The green-robed young man glanced at Lin Sun and the little girl. Seeing their old clothes, it was obvious that they were mountain people living nearby. So, he immediately gave up the idea of asking them. "May I know your name, benefactor? If there is a chance, I will repay you in the future." Lin Sun cupped his hands and said seriously. The green-robed young man seemed to be proud and noble, but he was a good person. At least he saved their lives just now, which was a great kindness. "Repay me?" The green-robed young man was stunned and seemed to feel it was very interesting. Then he shook his head and said, "You better take good care of yourselves. As for me, you can just treat me as a passerby." As he said, he flashed away on his sword and went straight to the clouds. His green robe was fluttering in the wind. A passerby? Lin Sun had a good impression of him. Through this sentence, he had roughly guessed that the green-robed young man might have saved him by chance and never thought about repaying him. What good man! Lin Sun praised. Meanwhile, the little girl at the side seemed to be slightly unusual. Since the end of the battle, she seemed as if she'd lost her soul, and she'd completely disregarded everything in the surroundings. She stared blankly at the forest in the distance while her young, beautiful, and fair face was suffused with a wisp of dense sorrow. Seeing this, Lin Sun couldn't help whispering, "Little girl, have you lost your parents?" "Yeah." The little girl shook her head and made a complicated and incomprehensible sound. Lin Sun was stunned. What kind of language was this? Seeing that Lin Sun didn't understand, the little girl bit her lips and finally sighed softly without saying anything. "By the way, thank you for your help just now." Lin Sun thought of the scene when he was carried by the little girl and fled in the forest. Although he felt a little strange, he was still very grateful to the little girl for her help. Yeah. The little girl raised her head and opened her dark jewel-like crescent eyes. She looked confused and didn't seem to understand what Lin Sun said. Lin Sun scratched his head and muttered in his heart. Could this little girl be a descendant of the savages in the mountains? He had heard from the villagers of Feiyun village that there were all kinds of demons and monsters in the depths of the 3,000 mountains. Fierce beasts and beasts were common, and there were even many uncivilized primitive barbarians and savages. But looking at the beautiful and tender appearance of the little girl, Lin Sun immediately dispelled the speculation in his heart. How could a savage be so beautiful? Suddenly, the little girl frowned, seeming to be a little tired. Then she blacked out, and her delicate and young body fell down. Seeing this, Lin Sun subconsciously held the little girl's body and checked her. Seeing that she was just in a coma, Lin Sun secretly breathed a sigh of relief. Without further delay, Lin Sun carried the little girl on his back and hurried back to Feiyun village. Along the way, thinking of today's experience, Lin Sun couldn't help but shake his head and sigh. He just wanted to hunt some fierce beasts to supplement his food, but he never thought that he would encounter such a great turmoil. First, he saw the voodoo barbarian kill a mighty grizzly bear, which caused a beast riot. Then he witnessed the peak duel between the voodoo barbarian and the man in green robe, which almost caused him to be affected and lose his life. Although he survived by luck, he saved a little girl who couldn't even speak clearly. Now, the prey he hunted was lost, and he had to go home with a little girl in a coma, which really made Lin Sun not know whether to laugh or cry. However, for Lin Sun, being able to witness the duel between two people in sea spirit realm by chance made Lin Sun more deeply realize the power of cultivation, and his dedication to cultivation became firmer. If he had enough power to burn the heavens and destroy the earth, he wouldn't be in such a passive and helpless situation today. He must become stronger. Lin Sun secretly made up his mind. Hundreds of miles away, while flying, the man in green robe took out a gorgeous and delicate jade edict and began to read it. This edict was issued by the Flamen of the Imperial Observatory more than a month ago. Only the most powerful figures of Xiao Empire could have it and know it. There's a strange phenomenon coming to the 3,000 mountains in the southwest border of the Empire. This phenomenon is mysterious and unpredictable. I can't see through its mystery with my power. I'm afraid that a peerless treasure will appear. Your Majesty, please treat it with caution. The man in green robe read it casually with a thoughtful and wise look in his eyes. Did the voodoo barbarian also come for this? Thinking of this, he couldn't help sighing softly. But where on earth is the peerless treasure hidden? I've been searching for it in the 3,000 mountains for more than 20 days. Chapter 35. When Lin Sun arrived at Feiyun village with the little girl on his back, he saw a group of people standing at the entrance of the village, all looking surprised and doubtful. Seeing Lin Sun's return, they all greeted him with joy. According to Shirautanrun, the village head, the battle that took place dozens of miles away just now was so powerful that it was like a landslide and a tsunami, which alarmed all the villagers in Feiyun village. Fortunately, it was far away and didn't affect Feiyun village. What happened there? Shirao Tianren asked worriedly. Beast riot. Lin Sun thought for a while and didn't tell the truth. The battle between two sea spirit realm practitioners was too shocking, so it was better to keep it a secret from the villagers. Speaking of this, Lin Sun's heart skipped a beat, and he hurriedly said, Village head, when I came back, I saw many beasts in the forest have been killed. This is a rare and unexpected harvest. Shirao Tianren's eyes lit up. This was good news. If they could collect enough beast meat, the villagers would have a good meal in the future. If they could collect some beast skin, tendons, and bones, they could even exchange them for a fortune. Without hesitation, Shirao Tianren hurriedly gathered more than 10 strong villagers and set off in a hurry. In such a busy time, no one even forgot to ask where the little girl on Lin Sun's back came from. Back home, Lin Sun put the little girl on his bed, covered her with a quilt, and wiped the dust off her face with a hot towel. When he saw the little girl's skin as white as suet jade, and her beautiful and tranquil face, Lin Sun couldn't help but be stunned. She was so beautiful. She was only 5 or 6 years old, but the beauty that was portrayed by the outline of her facial features was like a clear lotus in the hazy, misty rain, and she possessed an aura of spirituality that caused everything in the world to dim in comparison. Even with Lin Sun's wisdom, he couldn't help being stunned. After a long while, he murmured, She's so beautiful when she's young. I'm afraid she'll be a peerless beauty who can bring disaster to a country and people. The little girl's origin was mysterious, and she didn't look like a resident of Xiao Empire at all. This could be seen from the obscure words she spoke and the animal skin skirt she wore. Most importantly, even though the little girl was only 5 or 6 years old, there was an extremely powerful force hidden within her small and delicate body. Lin Sun would never forget that in the forest, he was picked up by the little girl like a chicken before he had time to react. How could an ordinary little girl do this? In addition, although the battle just happened very abruptly, Lin Sun vaguely felt that the voodoo barbarian didn't seem to want to kill him, but the little girl? Why would a warrior at the Sea of Souls realm want to deal with such a little girl? This was also a mystery that puzzled Lin Sun. In short, in Lin Sun's eyes, the little girl who was sleeping now must have many secrets. Forget it. What's the point of thinking so much? It has nothing to do with me anyway. Lin Sun shook his head, walked out of the room, and went into the kitchen. The girl had a dream. In her dream, she was running madly. Behind her, there were earth-shattering sounds of battle, and from time to time, there were cries of pain. Her heart was full of grief, helplessness, and hesitation. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew that if she stopped, she might be taken away by death. After running for a long time, the girl seemed to notice something. She suddenly turned her head, and then she saw a scene that almost made her collapse. A black bear that was over 100 feet tall fell to the ground with a loud bang and never stood up again. Opposite it stood a tall and sturdy man whose entire body was suffused with a golden light. Why? Why did this happen? An indescribable pain surged in the little girl's heart. She couldn't help but cry out in grief. But at this moment, she felt a hand wiping away her tears. The temperature of the palm was like a mother's embrace, which calmed her frightened and sorrowful mood. She wanted to turn her head and see who it was. At this moment, she woke up from the dream. The little girl opened her eyes and saw a delicate and pretty face. There was a hint of tenderness and warmth in the pair of clear black eyes. She remembered this face, and she also remembered the smell of this person. It was an aura that made her soul feel happy and comfortable. After killing the molten lava wolf that day, she had actually smelled this scent, but it wasn't as clear as it was now. "You're awake." Seeing the little girl wake up, Lin Sun couldn't help smiling. He picked up the cooked spiritual grain porridge and said, "Have something to eat first." The little girl looked at Lin Sun blankly, and then looked at the hot and fragrant porridge in his hand. Suddenly, she felt that she was really hungry. She sat up, held the bowl, and swallowed. In the blink of an eye, she drank up all the porridge. The little girl raised her head and looked at Lin Sun with her clear and dark crescent eyes. "More." Lin Sun was stunned and filled another bowl for her. The little girl didn't stand on ceremony and finished another bowl like a whirlwind. Lin Sun's eyes widened at once. This little girl looked so young, but she could eat so much. But it was good that she could eat. At least it proved that the little girl was healthy. Lin Sun directly carried the pot in and watched the little girl eat bowl after bowl of porridge. The smile on his lips froze little by little. How could she eat so much? It didn't take long for the whole pot of spiritual grain porridge to be wiped out. The little girl licked her lips, looked at Lin Sun, and babbled. Lin Sun didn't understand, so he could only look at the beautiful foodie and judge what she wanted to express from her expression. "Have a good rest." "You're welcome." Lin Sun cleaned up the bowls and chopsticks, turned around, and walked out of the house. Looking at the dusk sky, he was a little worried. He didn't know who the little girl's parents were. How could they be so cruel to leave her in the deep forest? If she followed him in the future, the food at home would be even more insufficient. But soon, Shurao Tianren brought good news to Lin Sun. When the night was about to fall, Shurao Tianren and the others finally returned with a bunch of huge, fierce beasts. Among them were snow-spot leopards, green vine pythons, bloodthorn wild boars, and even a rare iron-beaked pheasant. More than a dozen of them were carried into Lin Sun's courtyard by a group of strong villagers, sweating profusely. Shurao Tianren was full of excitement and high-spirited. Before Lin Sun asked, he waved his hand and said, "Take whatever you need. We have to go again at night. I didn't expect that we could pick up so many prey this time. God bless us." Before his voice died away, Shurao Tianren left with a group of people in high spirits. Looking at their eager faces, it was obvious that they were going to have a big fight. Lin Sun was speechless. He hurried to the door and saw not only Shurao Tianren and the others, but also the women and children of the village followed them and left the village with torches in their hands. If it wasn't for the little girl to take care of, Lin Sun couldn't help following them. Back in the courtyard, Lin Sun was also happy to see the fierce beasts dying one by one because he didn't have to worry about food anymore. In the next few days, the villagers ran back and forth between the deep mountains and Feiyun village as if they were celebrating a festival, bringing back many preys. But most of them were wild beasts and fierce beasts, and the number of fierce beasts was relatively small. Even so, the bodies of these fierce beasts were piled up like a mountain in Lin Sun's courtyard, which was quite spectacular. As for the wild beasts and fierce beasts, Lin Sun didn't need them. so they were all distributed to every household in the village by Shirao Tianren. At the same time, Shirao Tianren and other villagers also knew about the existence of the little girl. They didn't say anything about it, but every time they saw the beautiful and almost perfect face of the little girl, every villager was shocked. Shirao Tianren was no exception. As for the little kids, they were all dumbfounded by the little girl, which was extremely funny. They had planned to play with the little girl, but now they all flinched, as if they didn't dare to blaspheme her beauty. Lin Sun found it funny, but also gave him a headache. Sometimes it was hard to get close to someone who was too beautiful. In the end, Lin Sun asked Aunt Xiao in the village for help. She made a hooded cloak made of animal skin for the little girl to cover her beautiful face. Only then did Lin Sun feel much more at ease. The only thing that puzzled Lin Sun was that the little girl seemed to be unsociable. Except for being close to Lin Sun, she was never willing to get in touch with others. And Lin Sun noticed that the little girl always looked at others with a kind of indifference and alienation, even though her eyes seemed to be calm. Only when she was facing Lin Sun, the indifference and alienation would disappear. Why was it like this? Even Lin Sun didn't know. But after a few days of contact, Lin Sun already knew the name of the little girl. Shirao Ji. It was a very special name. Apart from that, Lin Sun knew nothing about the origin of the little girl. There was no way to communicate because of the language barrier. But to Lin Sun's surprise, Shirao Ji had already understood what he was talking about in just a few days, and even understood some simple words. This undoubtedly proved that under the beautiful face of the little girl, there was intelligence and amazing learning ability which were not inferior to her beauty. Lin Sun was an orphan. Now that he had Shirao Ji, who was also alone, by his side, he had long regarded her as his younger sister. Another 3 days passed. The villagers went deep into the forest and found that they could no longer pick up any prey. Only then did they stop this vigorous mopping up operation. At this time, the number of dead beasts piled up in Lin Sun's house had reached nearly 30. Lin Sun didn't stay idle these days. He spent almost all his time dissecting the dead beasts. It couldn't be helped. After a long time, the dead beasts would stink, which would be a great loss. Shirao Ji had been sitting quietly on one side, watching Lin Sun's busy figure, as if in her eyes there was only Lin Sun in the world. Chapter 36. Gurgle. In the courtyard, a pile of phosphorescent wood was burning fiercely, and a big pot on the fire was boiling with white smoke. Dozens of spiritual materials were boiling in the iron pot, including the flesh and blood of fierce beasts and some herbs. This was not refining medicine, but smelting spiritual ink. Generally speaking, a spiritual tattooist needed a special ink furnace to melt spiritual inks, which was specially cast for melting spiritual inks. Some precious ink stoves were even engraved with many spiritual tattoos inside, which were no different from spiritual weapons. However, Lin Sun couldn't refine an ink stove now, so he had to make do with an iron pot to smelt spiritual ink. The spiritual ink smelted in this way had ordinary effects and was a great waste of spiritual materials, but it could be used anyway. At this moment, Lin Sun was smelting a pot of red fire spiritual ink. The formula of red fire spiritual ink was very common, but the spiritual ink produced by different spiritual materials had completely different effects. For example, the spiritual material purple sunflower, which was also used to refine red fire spiritual ink, had different grades. 3-leaf purple sunflower was the most common but had ordinary effects, while 9-leaf purple sunflower was the rarest but had the best effects. The spiritual materials in the pot of red fire spiritual ink Lin Sun refined could only be regarded as medium in quality, neither too high nor too low, but it was enough to meet his needs. While smelting the spiritual ink, Lin Sun's hands were not idle. He was holding a piece of dark purple bone 1/2 foot long, about the thickness of a chopstick, and grinding it on the whetstone over and over again. This dark purple bone was taken from the leg bone of the fierce beast, iron-beaked pheasant, which was a very precious spiritual material. Its value lay in its ability to be refined into an inscribing pen. An inscribing pen, whose tip was as sharp as a knife, was the key tool for inscribing spiritual tattoos, so it was also called a tattoo knife. To judge the quality of an inscribing pen, one only needed to look at its material. The better the inscribing pen was, the easier it could communicate with the perception and spiritual energy of the spiritual tattooist. Similarly, when inscribing spiritual tattoos with a superior inscribing pen, the spiritual tattooist could precisely control the power of the spiritual ink, so that the spiritual tattoo traces inscribed by the inscribing pen could perfectly meet the needs of the spiritual tattooist in terms of shade, thickness, and curvature. After the dark gray inscribing pen left by Master Lu disappeared, Lin Sun lacked a suitable inscribing pen to practice the way of spiritual tattoos. Fortunately, there happened to be an iron-beak pheasant among the prey they obtained this time, and its leg bone was a kind of spiritual material to refine inscribing pens. Chi-chi. Under Lin Sun's constant polishing, the dark purple bone produced a sound of friction and sparks, which vaguely took the shape of an inscribing pen. Around the courtyard, there were piles of snow-white, ferocious beast skeletons. The walls were hung with marinated beast meat that weighed at least 500 kilograms. It was like a mountain of meat. Besides that, the beast skin, beast tendons, various scales, sharp claws, and beast horns were separated and piled up in an orderly manner. These were all valuable treasures that could be used to refine medicine, smelt spirit ink, and even be used to exchange for money. These were the results of Lin's hard work these days. Shurao Tonrin and his fellows had brought back so many rewards that Lin Sun got nearly 30 dead beasts. There were even more ferocious beasts and wild beasts, but they were of little use to Lin Sun, so they were all distributed to the households in the village. Therefore, Lin Sun was not the only one who was busy these days. The villagers also got up early and worked late at night to marinate the beast meat, for fear that the meat would go bad. It was not until today that Lin Sun finally dissected all the dead beasts and got rid of the useless ones, leaving only the valuable ones. The courtyard was filled with a strong smell of blood, but Lin Sun didn't notice it and concentrated on polishing the dark purple bone in his hand, after the time it took to burn a stick of incense. When the inscribing pen was completely formed, Lin Sun stood up and washed off the dust on the surface of the pen with clear spring water, revealing its true appearance. In the sunlight, the pen was slender and straight, with a faint dark purple color. The body of the pen was heavy and simple, and the tip of the pen was as thin as a cicada's wing, shining with dazzling cold light. Lin Sun calmly sensed the inscribing pen in his hand and separated wisps of spiritual energy to run in it, feeling the subtlety of it. After a long while, a satisfied smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. There was no problem with the inscribing pen itself, and he only needed to refine and nourish it with some special methods and spiritual materials, and then it would be a success. At this time, the iron pot on the fire made a sharp, boiling sound, as if it was about to explode. The spiritual ink was ready. Lin Sun immediately put out the fire and watched the iron pot cool down. Then he took out a white and clean porcelain bowl and walked to the iron pot. The entire cauldron of spirit materials had now been refined to the point only a layer of liquid that was like amber remained at the bottom of the cauldron. It was bright red and translucent, and there seemed to be a ball of flames burning enshrouded on its surface, causing it to emit a sweet fragrance that refreshed the heart. This was the red fire spiritual ink. It looked like a successfully refined spiritual medicine, but it was not meant to be swallowed. Lin Sun carefully put the red fire spiritual ink into the porcelain bowl, and the smile at the corner of his mouth widened. He could use it to inscribe spiritual tattoos in the evening. "Is it edible?" Xia Ji came to Lin Sun's side and asked in a sweet voice, pointing at the red fire spiritual ink. But what she said scared Lin Sun. He shook his head and said, "It's not food. You will be poisoned if you eat it." "Oh," She said nothing more and stood quietly on the side. "I will cook something delicious for you in the evening." Lin Sun touched Xia Ji's little head and turned to walk into the house. Xia Ji frowned, as if she didn't want to be touched by Lin Sun. She stood there for a long time and finally decided not to argue with Lin Sun. Speaking of this 5 or 6-year-old girl, she was indeed very special, completely different from other children. She was quiet and taciturn, but her learning ability was amazing, and she had extraordinary intelligence. Lin Sun talked with Xia Ji when he was free these days. He didn't expect that she could recognize the meaning of every sentence and say some simple words in just a few days. Like, is this edible? I'm not full yet. I want to eat more. Is there anything else to eat? This tastes good. It was no wonder that Lin Sun took Xia Ji as a beautiful little foodie. It was not difficult to see some clues from her words. In the evening, Shirao Tianren, the village head, walked into Lin Sun's yard. He was in a hurry, and as soon as he saw Lin Sun, he said directly, "Everything is ready. We can set off tomorrow morning." Lin Sun smiled. "It's faster than I expected." Just a few days ago, Lin Sun and Shirao Tianren had a discussion and finally decided to move all the villagers to a safe place before Lien Ruffeng and his men came back. This was also to prevent the villagers' safety from being affected when Lien Ruffeng and his men came back. Although they didn't know what Lien Ruffeng and his men were planning, both Lin Sun and Shirao Tianren knew it was not going to be a good thing. Speaking of which, thanks to the disaster of the beasts, we got a lot of prey. The food marinated with the prey is enough for all the villagers to hide outside for some time. Shirao Tianren laughed. Lin Sun also smiled and said, "That's settled, Uncle Shirao. Tomorrow, you take everyone to the abandoned mine tunnel and hide there. When I finish Lien Ruffeng and the others, we won't have to worry about anything else." Shirao Tianren nodded and then asked seriously, "Lin Sun, this is too dangerous. If you fail, don't risk your life. We can just admit defeat. Lien Ruffeng and his men won't dare to kill us all. As long as there is life, there is hope." Lin Sun's eyes were clear and calm, and he said, "Uncle Shirao, maybe other villagers have a way out, but if you and I fail, we are doomed to die. So we have to win this battle." His voice was full of determination. Shirao Tianren knew that Lien Ruffeng had been patient with him for a long time, and he would seize the opportunity to kill him. He also knew that after killing Lu Ting and Qian Shi, Lin Sun had no way out. He had to kill Lien Ruffeng or be killed by him. Thinking of this, Shirao Tianren couldn't help feeling worried, and asked, "Are you ready?" Lin Sun nodded. "Just the last step." Shirao Tianren patted on Lin Sun's shoulder and said, "Take care. If you fail, you must run away. The 3,000 mountains are so vast that Lien Ruffeng can't do anything to you. Remember, don't lose your life for the sake of others." Lin Sun felt warm in his heart and smiled. "Don't worry, Uncle Shirao. I know what I'm doing." Seeing this, Shirao gazed at Lin Sun for a long time and then turned to leave. But when he walked out of the gate, he suddenly said, "Being alive is more important than anything else. Remember that." His voice was old, floating in the blood-like ink of the evening. Lin Sun smiled and then turned back to his room. Yes, only when he was alive could he have the chance to take revenge. But if he died, everything would be over. He had learned this a long time ago. The next morning, the villagers left the village with their luggage, led by Shirao Tianren. They were just ordinary people, not practitioners, and they were powerless to fight against practitioners. Staying in the village would only be a burden to Lin Sun. Lin Sun stood at the entrance of the village, watching them leave, and then turned back. Looking at the deserted village, he was as calm as ever. The autumn wind was blowing, and the sky was covered with a layer of dark clouds, making the atmosphere oppressive, as if a storm was coming. Although Lien Ruffeng hadn't come back yet, Lin Sun knew it wouldn't be long. "Are you going to fight?" When Lin Sun returned to his house, he saw Shirao Ji in an animal skin cloak, waiting for him there. Lin Sun nodded. He knew it was hard to hide from the little girl, who was smart. "Let me help you." Shirao Ji raised her head, showing her beautiful face under the hat. Her eyes were as clear as black jewels, full of seriousness. P.S. I can't help but think of what Shirao Ji said in the group a few days ago. "You want to fight for the monthly votes? Let me help you." Chapter 37. Rumble. Under the clear sky, the earth quaked. A group of people galloped at full speed, stirring up a cloud of dust. At the head of the group were two magnificent scaly horses. The burly Lien Ruffung was sitting on one of them. Beside him was a skinny old man in brocade robes with a goatee. The old man was dressed splendidly and had an arrogant bearing. Obviously, he was not a native of a remote village. Behind Lien Ruffung and the old man were about a dozen guards. Some of them were from Feiyun village, and some were the subordinates of the old man in brocade robes. Elder Wu, we will arrive at Feiyun village in 2 hours, Lien Ruffung said with a smile, with a hint of awe and flattery on his face. Elder Wu was Wu Henshui, the chief deacon of Wu's pharmacy in Green Sun Tribe. He had reached the 8th level of martial realm, De Zhou Tian, and was extremely powerful. Even in Green Sun Tribe, where merchants gathered, Wu Henshui was very famous. He could be regarded as a big shot in Green Sun Tribe. Over the years, Lien Ruffung and a group of guards escorted goods to Green Sun Tribe to exchange for daily necessities. Their target was Wu's pharmacy. Through Wu Henshui, Lien Ruffung successfully sent his son, Lien Fei, to Donglin City for cultivation. For Lien Ruffung, Wu Henshui was an omnipotent master, so he had to respect him. Wu Henshui nodded indifferently and suddenly asked, "Have you ever heard of blood marrow grit?" Lien Ruffung was stunned. "Is that the name of a herb?" Lien Ruffung's ignorance was exposed by this question. Wu Henshui glanced at Lien Ruffung with slight contempt and shook his head secretly. This man from a remote village was indeed vulgar and ignorant. Though vulgar, Lien Ruffung still had sharp eyes. He immediately realized that he had made a fool of himself. He asked, "Elder Wu, what do you mean by mentioning it?" Wu Henshui thought for a moment and said, "I don't mind telling you. I heard that there is an abandoned Feiyun fire copper vein near your village." Lien Ruffung nodded. "Exactly." Wu Henshui said, "Do you know that, generally speaking, as long as there is Feiyun fire copper, there will be scarlet bloodbats building their nests?" Lien Ruffung nodded and flattered. "Elder Wu, you are really knowledgeable. I remember there are scarlet bloodbats in the abandoned mine tunnel. I was worried about the danger of entering it, so I regarded it as a forbidden area. I almost forgot about it, if you didn't remind me." Wu Henshui stroked his goatee and said complacently, "What a coincidence. I happened to read an ancient book a while ago, and it said that wherever the scarlet bloodbats appear, there will be blood marrow grit. This is a very valuable spirit material. Just 1 grit can be exchanged for 10 copper coins." Lien Ruffung immediately flattered him. "Elder Wu, you have a pair of sharp eyes. We vulgar people are no match for you. But what is the use of the blood marrow grit?" Wu Henshui felt proud and didn't mind giving some advice. "This thing is very precious. It can refine the blood marrow and improve the physique. If it can be used for cultivation, it can at least increase the chance of breaking through the 5th level of martial realm by 20%. Lien Ruffung was shocked. So magical. He was now stuck in the 4th level of martial realm, unable to break through, because he couldn't refine his blood marrow until it was as white as snow. But the blood marrow grit could be used to refine the blood marrow, which shocked Lien Ruffung. Wu Henshui looked at Lien Ruffung with a little rumination and said, "You are still too inexperienced." Lien Ruffung hurriedly said, "Elder Wu, is the blood marrow grit the purpose of your visit?" Wu Henshui nodded. "This is one of the reasons. The other is for the spiritual land near Feiyun village." Lien Ruffung smiled. "Don't worry. I've been planning for a long time. I promise I can accomplish this task." Yes, this was Lien Ruffung's plot. He wanted to help Wu Henshui occupy the spiritual land of Feiyun village. In this way, Lien Ruffung and his fellows could take root in Green Sun Tribe with this credit. In the future, with the help of Wu Henshui, they could even make a name for themselves in Donglin Town. As for whether the villagers in Feiyun village would object or not, Lien Ruffung didn't care at all. It was for his future cultivation. So what if they objected? He could just kill them all. They were just a group of ordinary people. What was the difference between them and ants? Wu Henshui said calmly, "That's good. When these spiritual lands are planted with spiritual herbs, we will make more money, and you will have a share. Lien Ruffeng beamed with joy. Thank you so much, Elder Wu. They talked like this. Soon, spiritual lands came into view one after another, and the outline of a village could be seen in the distance. Seedlings of spiritual grains were planted in the spiritual lands, green and tender, like green silk, covering the ground, pleasing to the eye. Here we are, looking at the familiar village and spiritual lands. Lien Rufeng's heart was burning with excitement. As long as he finished today's task, he would have a bright future. Behind him, a group of guards could not hide their excitement. What a waste. Such good spiritual lands are planted with spiritual grains. Isn't a waste of such a good place? Wu Henshui looked at the seedlings of spiritual grains in the spiritual lands and could not help shaking his head and sighing. Lien Ruffeng was startled. Elder Wu, spiritual lands can be divided into good and bad. Wu Henshui glanced at him disdainfully. There's a lot of land in the 3,000 mountains. But how much can be reclaimed as spiritual lands? He pointed at the spirit fields in the distance and said, Look, there must be traces of spirit veins hidden under every piece of spirit field. Otherwise, how could such rich soil be produced? You country bumpkins are really ignorant and crude. Being called a country bumpkin, Lien Ruffeng was angry, but he put on an apologetic smile. Elder Wu is right. We are indeed ignorant. Wu Henshui snorted. What are you going to do with the villagers? Lien Ruffeng gritted his teeth. If they are willing to help you plant spiritual herbs, it will be easy. If not, I will kill them. Wu Henshui nodded. It's better to keep them alive. Planting and harvesting spiritual herbs need a lot of manpower. I don't want to buy a batch of slaves to help. Lien Ruffeng hurriedly nodded. Elder Wu is right. Wu Henshui said, No more nonsense. Let's go to the village and have a look. Immediately, the group of people rode toward Feiyun village in the distance. They were so aggressive that they didn't even try to hide their arrogance. It made sense. For them, the villagers living in Feiyun village were just a group of poor country bumpkins who didn't practice cultivation and were shallow and ignorant. To deal with them, they didn't need any tricks at all. They just needed to kill them in a straightforward way. Wu Henshui thought so. So did Lien Ruffeng, and so did the guard behind them. However, what they didn't expect was that after a few months, Feiyun village was indeed different from before. Buzz. Just when they arrived at the entrance of the village, a sharp whistling sound suddenly came from afar. It was soul-stirring. Shit, there's an ambush. Wu Henshui's face changed slightly, and he stopped his horse. Lien Ruffeng felt a chill in his heart, and his hair stood on end. He almost subconsciously urged his horse to dodge. Bang! A sharp black light brushed past Lien Ruffeng's shoulder and pierced the chest of a guard behind him. Blood spurted out. It was an arrow, and it was unbelievably fast. If Lien Ruffeng hadn't dodged in time, he would have been killed by this blow. Lien Ruffeng was sweating all over, but before he could react, the arrow in the chest of the guard behind him suddenly exploded. Boom! Like a thunderclap, the guard's body was blasted into pieces, causing blood to spray into the surroundings, and it shocked all the nearby guards to the point of dodging in astonishment. Bastard, is this what you've been planning these days? When Wu Henshui saw this, although he was shocked and angry, he still maintained his composure. He got off the horse and hid behind the horse's buttocks on guard. Elder Wu, please calm down. Lien Ruffeng gritted his teeth, and his eyes were full of ferocity. He drew out a long saber and shouted, Don't panic. Get ready for battle. Buzz. Before his voice died away, the familiar whistling sound came again. An arrow, like a shooting star, suddenly burst from the village. Boom! Another guard didn't even have time to dodge. He and his horse were blown into pieces, flesh and blood flying everywhere. Just 2 arrows had taken the lives of 2 guards in the blink of an eye. All of a sudden, the guards were panic-stricken. They abandoned their horses and hid far away. Until now, they hadn't been able to track the enemy. They could only roughly guess that the arrow came from the village. Lien Ruffeng, of course, could see this. He was shocked and angry, and his face turned livid. Since when did an archer who was proficient in archery hide in the village? An archer who could kill a practitioner was by no means an ordinary person. Is it Lin Sun, the little bastard? No. I've sent Lu Ting and Qian Shi to guard the village. I'm afraid he's already disabled. Wait, no. Suddenly, Lien Ruffing thought of something. Where are Lu Ting and Qian Shi? Bastard. Hurry up and kill your way into the village. Do you want to stay here and be a live target? Wu Henshui was experienced in fighting. He naturally knew that on the flat ground, there was no way to block the arrow. His body would be directly exposed to the enemy, which was extremely dangerous. However, Wu Henshui would not rush into the village rashly. Who knew how many masters were hiding in the village? Lien Ruffing suddenly came to his senses and shouted, "Brothers, follow me. Let's kill that damn archer." With a roar, he moved forward like a tiger, quickly approaching the village. Behind him, the guards were panic-stricken, but they knew that if they couldn't kill the archer, they would only be a live target. So they braced themselves and followed Lien Ruffing. Buzz. Chapter 38. Lien Ruffing's face suddenly changed, and he subconsciously threw himself to one side. Boom! A jet-black arrow shot out. Although one of the guards blocked the attack with his saber, the arrow suddenly exploded when it collided with him. The guard let out a blood-curdling scream as his entire body exploded into pieces. Lien Ruffing and the others' faces changed again. The arrow was not only fast, but also extremely powerful. It had an unimaginable explosive power, which could not be blocked at all. "The enemy is over there," a guard roared, pointing to the distance of the village. Lien Ruffing immediately saw a figure flashing on the top of a stone house in the village. The figure was vaguely familiar. Lin Sun? Lien Ruffing's pupil shrank. Was it the 13-year-old boy? Go! With no time to think, Lien Ruffing shouted and rushed into the village first. The terrain of the village was complicated, and there were many places to hide, which made it difficult for the archer to exert his power. It was not like outside the village, where there was no place to hide and could only be exposed to the air as a live target. These guards were all experienced in fighting, so they naturally knew the reason. They all rushed into the village with Lien Ruffing. In the distance, Wu Henshui witnessed all this with a livid face. How could he expect such a powerful archer was hiding in such a small village? Elder Wu, the arrow is extremely powerful. It seems to be not an ordinary weapon. If I guessed right, the arrow should be inscribed with the explosive flame spiritual tattoo. A middle-aged man nearby said in surprise. This was Han Junshan, a capable subordinate of Wu Henshui, who had the cultivation of the 4th level of martial realm. What was more, Han Junshan was an apprentice of spiritual tattooist. Although Han Junshan had long lost the hope of becoming a spiritual tattooist due to his poor aptitude, he had studied spiritual tattoos, so he still had good eyesight. Explosive flame spiritual tattoo? Wu Henshui's heart skipped a beat. You mean there's a spiritual tattooist in the village? Han Junshan shook his head. I don't think so. Explosive flame spiritual tattoo is only one of the basic spiritual tattoos. I'm sure I can inscribe it, but what? Wu Henshui asked. The quality of spiritual ink needed to inscribe this explosive flame spiritual tattoo is extremely strict. Moreover, it is inscribed on an arrow. Such an arrow can be sold for 30 copper coins in Donglan Town. It's hard for me to imagine how such a poor place could have such a precious thing. Han Junshan frowned. That was what puzzled him. Wu Henshui's eyelids twitched. You mean there are masters in the village? After that, he shook his head and denied it. No, if there's an expert, there's no need for them to hide here and ambush us. According to my judgment, the opponent's combat strength shouldn't be strong, and that's why they would act in this way. Han Junshan nodded and said, That's what I think too. He must have consumed a lot of his energy with the arrows just now. If we can seize the opportunity now, we can definitely take him down. Wu Henshui thought of something and said, In this way, we may know the origin of these arrows. Maybe we can make a fortune. Han Junshan smiled cooperatively. Exactly. Who would have thought that there are dozens of acres of good spiritual fields, a good place to hide blood marrow grits, and even treasures like explosive flame arrows in this poor little village. Wu Henshui took a deep breath and said coldly, "That's good. When Lien Rufeng and the other bumpkins get rid of their opponents, everything will be in our pocket." Han Junshan asked, "Elder Wu, shouldn't we go and help them?" Wu Henshui sneered and looked at the village in the distance. He said leisurely, "The son of a noble family should not sit under the eaves. It's better to leave it to those bumpkins." Feiyun village was not large, but the streets were winding and messy. The houses in the village were not uniformly planned and were built in disorder like a spider web. If a person wanted to hide in the houses, it was not easy to be found. Unless a strong practitioner above the gang spirit realm came, he could locate the hidden trace in a flash with his strong mind. Otherwise, he could only search by feeling and eyesight when he entered the village. Lin Sun was not worried about this. He knew that his opponents were all strong practitioners in the martial realm. That was why he moved all the villagers out of the village in order to kill Lien Rufeng and the others with the help of the intricate terrain. In this way, he didn't have to worry about Lien Rufeng threatening him with the villagers' lives. Who at this moment, Lin Sun was hiding in a house. He took out a water bag and gulped it down while gasping for breath. The water bag contained spiritual refining liquid, which could quickly replenish his spiritual energy. Although he only shot 3 arrows just now, it consumed more than half of his spiritual energy. Thanks to the fact that he had just reached the 3rd level of martial realm and refined by the spiritual vortex, his spiritual energy had been condensed to the extreme. It would have been impossible for him to do this in the past. Feeling the spiritual energy in his body gradually recovering, Lin Sun looked calm, but in his heart he felt pity. Just now, he wanted to kill Lien Rufeng by surprise, but he failed in the end. Thinking of this, the figure of Wu Henshui came to Lin Sun's mind. He didn't know this old man with a goatee, but his intuition told him that this old guy was more dangerous than Lien Rufeng. What on earth is he after that Lien Rufeng brought such a strong practitioner back? Lin Sun frowned. He knew that today was going to be troublesome. He thought he was just going to deal with Lien Rufeng and the others, but now there was a dangerous man of unknown origin, which made Lin Sun feel pressured. Soon, the spiritual energy in his body recovered to its original state. The abundant strength refreshed Lin Sun and drove all the distracting thoughts out of his mind. Lin Sun took off the white bone big bow and replaced it with the sky breacher. He took a deep breath and flashed out of the room like a nimble leopard cat. The fight had begun, and Lin Sun was doomed to die. There was no time for Lin Sun to think about anything else. The village was no longer peaceful. Footsteps and shouts sounded from time to time, which indicated that Lien Rufeng and the others were trying their best to find Lin Sun. 3 dead, 12 to go. The most dangerous one is the old man with a goatee. Lien Rufeng can't underestimate him. Lin Sun calculated quickly as he sneaked through the alleys of the village cautiously. When Lin Sun came to the corner of an alley, he suddenly stopped, and a touch of coldness flashed in his eyes. Although he didn't hear any sound, Lin Sun sensed that danger was approaching. Holding his breath, Lin Sun quickly approached the corner and waited. Silently, the figure of a guard appeared, light and alert. He held a saber in one hand and a shield in the other, fully alert. When Lin Sun saw his opponent, the guard also saw Lin Sun. The distance between them was only 1 meter. Swish! With a flash of green light, Lin Sun used the heavy chop of the chop formula without hesitation. The momentum of the saber was like a mountain. The guard reacted quickly. With a roar, he moved forward instead of retreating. He raised his shield to block, and at the same time, the long saber in his right hand stabbed out. Boom! However, the guard had underestimated Lin Sun's strength. With a loud bang, the shield in his hand shattered, and his whole body was hit by a huge force. With a bang, he flew out and hit the opposite wall. His head tilted to one side, and he fell to the ground, unable to get up again. Puff! Without any delay, Lin Sun leaped forward and stabbed his opponent's throat. With a swish, blood spurted out. But Lin Sun had already swooped down like a cheetah. He tiptoed on the ground, turned around, and disappeared in the alley. The opponent was only at the second level of martial realm, which was no threat to Lin Sun. Therefore, this sudden confrontation was a clean win for Lin Sun. When Lin Sun disappeared, someone heard the news and saw the guard's body on the ground, roaring angrily. Not long after, the same scene occurred again in the other corner of the village. A guard was carefully moving forward, but a blade suddenly rushed down from the wall and slashed his head in half. He didn't even have the time to scream before he fell to the ground, never to get up again. Like a ghost, Lin Sun disappeared again. As early as a few days ago, Lin Sun had walked through every corner of Feiyun village, imprinting every possible hiding place in his mind in order to deal with the current situation. In this case, Lin Sun was waiting for the right moment, while Lien Rufeng and others were totally unprepared. They were caught unprepared at once. As time went by, Lien Rufeng and others' faces became gloomy. Their hearts were filled with unspeakable anger and fear. First, they were killed by arrows at the entrance of the village, and then they entered the village and started a street fight. No matter how stupid Lien Rufeng and others were, they knew the enemy had prepared for all this. A quarter of an hour later, Elder Brother Lien, the villagers are not here. We can't threaten them with their lives. This is obviously a trap. A guard said in a low voice with fear on his face. Of course I know that. Lien Rufeng looked at the remaining 6 people around him, feeling very agitated. Realizing the situation was not good, he gathered his scattered subordinates together. However, he did not expect that 5 more people would be killed in just a quarter of an hour. Including Lien Rufeng, there were only 7 people left in the village. Lin Sun, Lien Rufeng gnashed his teeth with hatred. By this time, he had completely understood that there was only one opponent, the thin 13-year-old boy. But Lien Rufeng did not expect that the boy, whom he had never taken seriously, would change into another person after a few months. He was cunning, cruel, and incredibly powerful. Obviously, the disappearance of Lu Ting and Qian Shi was caused by Lin Sun. Shao Unren, that old bastard, where did he find such a cruel little thing? Lien Rufeng figured out. Buzz. Suddenly, the familiar strange whistling sound came from afar again. It was the sound of something tearing through the air. Chapter 39. Despite his anger, Lien Rufeng and his fellows had to dodge to one side. Boom! The arrow was like a waterfall, exploding a big pit on the ground. Dirt splashed everywhere, making Lien Rufeng and his fellows covered in dirt. Wang Jun, Xiao Shi, you two go to Elder Wu for help. Lien Rufeng roared. His face was ferocious, and he was furious at Wu Henshui's inaction. Your life is valuable, but mine is not. What kind of F***king situation was this? Were they still not going to make a move? Did they really want to wait for all of them to die? Wang Jun and Xiao Shi also knew the situation was serious, so they hurried away. Brother Lien, what should we do? Someone asked. Wait, we can't take the initiative anymore. That boy is as cunning as a ghost. He won't fight face to face. Only a master like Elder Wu can defeat him. Lien Rufeng took a deep breath and said coldly, he would not risk his life again. If he died, everything would be over. As for what Wu Henshui would think, Lien Rufeng didn't care. The others heaved sighs of relief in their hearts when they saw this. Truthfully speaking, up until this point in the battle and watching their companions die successively, they'd been terrified as well. Everyone was waiting for Wu Henshui's help. As time went by, the atmosphere in the village became more and more bleak. A gust of wind blew, stirring up a pile of fallen leaves and bringing the smell of blood. Lien Rufeng suddenly had a bad feeling. The distance from the village to the entrance was less than a few miles. Even if he walked step by step, half an hour would be enough. But now there was no news at all. Was there an accident? When this thought flashed in his mind, Lien Rufeng's heart suddenly tightened, and an indescribable panic arose in him. Let's go and have a look together. Lien Rufeng gritted his teeth and left with his fellows. He could not wait to die like this anymore. The village he was so familiar with now seemed so strange, like a place of the dead. It was chilling. Before long, Lien Rufeng and his fellows stopped at the entrance of an alley. In the shadow of the alley, there were two dead bodies. One had his chest broken, and the other's throat was crushed, and his head was twisted and soft. The two bodies were Wang Zhuan and Xiao Shi, who had gone to ask for help. Lin Rufeng and his fellows felt like falling into an ice cave. Two more dead. Run! One of the guards seemed to be unable to endure this kind of stimulation, and with a maddened roar, he rushed out of the village. Come back! Lin Rufeng's expression changed abruptly. However, it was already a step too late. With a bang, an arrow shot out from the leaves of an old locust tree in the distance, instantly killing the guard. Another comrade had died in front of him. Just a few hundred feet away, Lin Rufeng looked ferocious, and his eyes almost popped out of their sockets. This was too much. Kill that little bastard for me. Lin Rufeng roared and rushed to the old locust tree in the distance like a madman. He had already seen Lin's son. Chase. The remaining three guards hesitated for a moment, but in the end, they gritted their teeth and followed. I was careless. At the entrance of the village, Wu Henshui and Han Junshan walked side by side. Along the way, they found many corpses. Experienced as they were, they could tell from the wounds that the enemy was not as simple as they had imagined. Indeed, the enemy has obviously been preparing for a long time. Taking advantage of the village terrain, he adopted the strategy of breaking through one by one. Sneak attack, snipe breakthrough. He didn't confront Lin Rufeng at all, but there is no doubt that this strategy is the most suitable. Han Junshan said in a low voice, I didn't expect to meet such a cunning and ruthless person in this remote village. Anyway, he is just one person. I like to see who he is. How could he have such a scheming, ruthless, and meticulous mind? But in my opinion, his cultivation should not be higher than the 5th level of martial realm. Otherwise, he would have killed Lin Rufeng first instead of waiting until now. Wu Henshui's expression was indifferent as he walked forward leisurely. He seemed extremely relaxed, but his shoulders were slightly arched and his eyes were like lightning. His aura was condensed and did not dissipate. It was obvious that he was ready to fight. Elder Wu, we have suffered a heavy loss this time. Han Junshan frowned. You think too much. I won't let such an opponent go. If he is alive, I won't be able to sleep well in the future. Wu Henshui said indifferently. Han Junshan nodded. That's right. At this time, Wu Henshui suddenly raised his head. With eyes as sharp as an eagle's, he pointed to the distance and said, The enemy is over there. Clang! Han Junshan pulled out a huge black sword, full of killing intent. Seeing this, Wu Henshui heaved a long sigh. Since I reached the 8th level of martial realm and became the deacon of the medicine house in Green Sun Tribe, I rarely have the chance to fight by myself. This time, I hope the opponent is not too weak. Han Junshan smiled and said, Elder Wu, leave it to me this time. Such an opponent is not worthy for you to fight. Wu Henshui glanced at him and said, All right. Their words showed that they didn't take Lin Sun seriously at all. They were extremely confident. They did have the capital to be proud. One was on the 8th level of martial realm. The other was on the 4th level of martial realm. Besides, the cultivation methods they practiced were far superior to the villagers like Lin Rufeng. Under such circumstances, there was only one way to deal with an enemy who hadn't reached the 5th level of martial realm. No matter how cunning the enemy was, in the face of absolute power, there was only one way to choose death. However, just as the two of them were about to take action, they suddenly noticed that a small and delicate figure had appeared on the street several hundred feet away. This figure wore a black beast skin cloak, and the hood covered his face, only revealing a small section of his fair and delicate chin. His skin was glistening, and when contrasted with the black cloak, he actually had a breathtaking feeling. She was obviously a very young girl, but standing in the middle of the street at this time, Wu Henshui and Han Junshan both felt an indescribable horror in their hearts. When they saw that the little girl was holding a 3-meter-long spear that was completely white and suffused with a chilly and hazy starlight, the expressions of the two of them couldn't help but change drastically. A spiritual weapon. The breath from the white bone spear was so strong that it couldn't be possessed by an ordinary weapon. Was this little girl a practitioner in gang spirit realm? Thinking of this, Even Wu Henshui and Han Junshan felt it absurd. How could a little girl have such a cultivation? Or this spiritual weapon didn't belong to her? Thinking of this, Wu Henshui's heart skipped a beat, and a touch of passion surged in his eyes. After the little girl appeared, she just stood there, her slim figure bathed in the bloody twilight, adding a trace of mystery to her. She didn't move, but Wu Henshui and Han Junshan knew clearly that the little girl was here to stop them. Go test out this little girl's background. Wu Henshui winked at Han Junshan. It was obviously abnormal that a little girl with a spiritual weapon suddenly appeared in this weird village. Out of caution, Wu Henshui chose to wait and see. Little girl, get out of the way. Han Junshan was not a fool. He naturally knew that the little girl's appearance was strange, so he tested her with words. The little girl shook her head and didn't speak. Han Junshan's heart sank. The little girl was really here to stop them, which made him inexplicably nervous. He couldn't tell why he was so vigilant against the child, but years of battle experience told him that it was absolutely right to be careful. If you don't get out of the way, don't blame me for killing you. Han Junshan's killing intent was revealed, and his eyes were as sharp as a knife. He stepped forward with the black giant sword in his hand, looking as powerful as a mountain. He was a master in the aperture opening realm, the 4th level of martial realm. His acupoints were full of chi, and when he ran his body, the momentum generated was like a wolf and a tiger, extremely frightening. Swish! Before he finished his words, the little girl seemed to feel the killing intent. She suddenly raised her head, revealing a pair of beautiful black crescent eyes, but the eyes were full of indifference and no emotion. What? Han Junshan felt that his whole body trembled under the gaze, as if a sharp sword was pointed at his throat, and his heart was filled with endless fear. The next moment, he only felt that his eyes were blurred, and wisps of beautiful and clear starlight suddenly appeared, like a dream, an illusion, a magnificent dream. Han Junshan was in a trance. So beautiful. Almost at the same time, he heard a thunderous shout. Watch out. Han Junshan was confused. Watch out. Puff. Before he could react, he felt a pain in his throat, and his whole body flew out, as if he had been hit by a huge mountain. Han Junshan finally came to his senses, but it was too late. He only felt that his eyes went black, and the world instantly fell into endless darkness. The wisp of dreamy and gorgeous starlight suddenly vanished as well. Wu Henshui felt cold all over, and his clothes were soaked in cold sweat. Just at that moment, he saw Han Junshan stand there stupidly, as if he was possessed, without any reaction. His throat was easily pierced by the white-bone spear in the little girl's hand. It was so fast that Wu Henshui had no time to save him. It was too terrible, and the scene was too strange. A 5- or 6-year-old girl, holding a spear, killed a master in the 4th level of martial realm in an incredible way. Wu Henshui couldn't imagine it. Because he couldn't imagine it, he was frightened by the scene, as if he had fallen into an ice cave. At this moment, Wu Henshui completely lost his confidence. Even the cultivation of the 8th level of martial realm couldn't bring him a sense of security. He forgot about the blood marrow grit, forgot about devouring the spiritual fields, and forgot about dealing with the archer. He just wanted to leave. This place was too horrible, with unimaginable dangers everywhere. It was not a remote village, but a land of death. Without any hesitation, Wu Henshui turned around and fled. But in the blink of an eye, he felt a sharp pain in his back, and then he flew out. Everything went black, and he completely lost consciousness. There was no time to react or dodge. Everything happened in a flash. Under the setting sun, Xia Ji, in a black cloak, came to Wu Henshui and frowned. She found that this blow didn't kill him completely, which made her a little dissatisfied. When she was about to give another blow, she suddenly heard a triumphant and cruel laughter in the distance. Was Lin in danger? Chapter 40. In the northwest corner of Feiyun Village, it was a row of old houses that had fallen into disrepair. When Lin Sun appeared here, he knew he was surrounded and had nowhere to retreat. At the intersection, 3 guards surrounded him in a triangular formation. They all looked ferocious, and their eyes were full of hatred and killing intent. Behind the intersection, Lien Ruffung was waiting with a long saber in his hand. Lin Sun could not escape even if he had wings. But there was not a trace of nervousness on his face. There was even a smile on his lips, but there was no warmth in his eyes. Lin Sun knew it would be a fierce fight as early as the beginning of the battle. Fortunately, there were only Lien Ruffung and 3 other guards left, and the dangerous old man with a goatee did not show up. Lien Ruffung laughed, but his smile was grim and ferocious. "Why don't you run away, you little bastard?" Lin Sun smiled, and with a sudden push of his toes, he twisted his body and rushed to Lien Ruffung, exposing his back. The 3 guards behind were stunned for a moment, and then they were overjoyed and rushed to Lin Sun with their swords. Clang! The guard with a short axe rushed to Lin Sun first. But to his surprise, Lin Sun's figure, which was originally rushing forward, suddenly stagnated as if he was frozen. Then his archback sprang up like a spring, and he suddenly spun in the air. Whoosh! With a sound of saber, Lin Sun's sky breacher rolled back and drew a semicircle in the air. From a distance, Lin Sun and his saber became one, spinning in the air like a top, and the blade rolled up thousands of waves. This was the whirl of the 6-word saber play. With the saber as the blade, it rotated like a whirlpool, which was the most treacherous and ruthless. Puff! The guard's arms holding the short axe were cut off by the whirlpool. He could not stop his body from rushing forward and hit the whirlpool of the blade. His head was cut off and thrown away in an instant. Blood splashed everywhere. It was a ghastly scene. The 2 guards behind Lin Sun were a little late. Seeing this scene, they were scared out of their wits and hurriedly dodged to one side. But Lin Sun was already like a rainbow flashing in the sky. He launched a surprise attack with his saber. Swish! 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 Bastard! Lien Ruffung, on the other side, dashed forward with a ferocious look on his face. His breath was raging, and his long saber was as fast as lightning. He didn't expect that Lin Sun would turn around and point his spear at the 3 guards behind him. For Lien Ruffung, this kind of diversion tactic was nothing. But he didn't expect that Lin Sun was still so brave and fierce in close combat. Lin Sun killed one of his men with one saber strike, leaving him no chance to rescue his men. Seeing that Lin Sun was attacking the other 2, Lien Ruffung could no longer hold back his anger and rushed to Lin Sun. Woo-woo! The long, narrow, and dark blade was like a poisonous snake coming out of its hole, rubbing against the void and making a ghostly wail and wolf-like howl. It went straight to Lin Sun's back. This attack was shrewd and cunning. If Lin Sun wanted to save his life, he had to give up the attack on the 2 guards. To Lien Ruffung's surprise, Lin Sun seemed to be unaware of it. Instead of dodging, he kept chasing after a guard. He was courting death. Lien Ruffung was overjoyed. How could he miss such an opportunity? He slashed at Lin Sun's back with the blade in his hand. Bang! Although the saber hit, there was no bloody scene as expected. Instead, it made a harsh sound as if it hit a steel plate. Oh no! The little bastard was wearing armor. Lien Ruffung's heart thumped, and his face changed. At this time, Lin Sun had already accelerated like a cannonball with the help of the shock force of his saber. At the same time, the saber in his hand poured down like a cyan waterfall. With a puff, the head of a guard was cut off. Crash! The headless body of the guard fell to the ground with a loud crash. Lin Sun's face suddenly turned pale, and he almost coughed up blood with a sweet taste in his throat. But with a flash of ruthlessness in his eyes, he forced himself to endure it and rushed to the last guard. The last guard had already been shocked by the change in front of him. Seeing Lin Sun rushing towards him, he roared and fled to the distance regardless of anything. This scene stunned Lin Sun and Lien Ruffung. It seemed that they didn't expect that Lien Ruffung would run away. Lien Ruffung was so cowardly. "You are the last one." Lin Sun gasped and looked at Lien Ruffung. Up to this point, Lin Sun had consumed a lot of his spiritual energy. If he hadn't replenished himself with a spiritual refining liquid from time to time, he would have died long ago. After all, He was at the third level of martial realm. No matter how pure and vigorous his spiritual energy was, it was still limited. Lin Sun suffered a serious internal injury after being hit by Lien Rufeng's saber. Under such circumstances, the fact that Lin Sun could still hold on made Lien Rufeng's heart palpitate. If it were him, he wouldn't have been able to hold on until now. But the young man was still standing, blood dripping from the blade in his hand, and the killing intent all over his body showed no sign of weakening. How could a young man at the third level of martial realm be able to do this? Lien Rufeng couldn't figure it out, but he could see that Lin Sun had consumed a lot of his spiritual energy. It was not an exaggeration to say that Lin Sun was at the end of the fight, which made him feel a little relieved. Just me alone is enough to take your life. Thoughts flashing in his mind, Lien Rufeng didn't slow down. He strode forward with a fierce momentum and slashed at Lin Sun with his long saber. Compared with Lin Sun, he didn't consume much physical energy since the beginning of the fight. He was at the peak of his momentum. Most importantly, his cultivation was much higher than Lin Sun's. Swish! The long saber splashed, and the spiritual energy gathered, dazzling. Lien Rufeng hated Lin Sun to the core, so he wouldn't give him a chance to breathe. Bang, bang, bang. Within a few breaths, the two had fought dozens of times. Lin Sun's face was getting paler, but his saber skills were not disordered. Every move was as delicate as an antelope's horn. His spiritual energy was running out, but he still had the strength of flesh and blood. With the subtle understanding of six-word saber play, he could resolve all the attacks with entanglement. Entanglement was the art of detour. Entanglement was the art of subduing the enemy with skill and using his strength to fight back. It was like using a small amount of force to overcome a strong force. At this time, Lin Sun's entanglement was like a silkworm spinning silk in spring. It was as slow as the spring rain and as rustling as the river waves. The key was to use the enemy's strength to fight back. Lien Rufeng's face grew gloomier. He felt that Lin Sun was like a slippery loach, making his every move feel like hitting in a swamp. What kind of saber play was this? Lien Rufeng had been traveling between Feiyun Village and Green Sun Tribe since he started his cultivation. He had even been to Donglin City, where he had seen many powerful practitioners and martial arts. But he couldn't find a martial art as mysterious as Lin Sun's saber play. However, Lien Rufeng soon found that Lin Sun's face was getting paler and paler, soaked in cold sweat. Obviously, he couldn't hold on any longer. After I kill this little thing, I might be able to snatch the cultivation technique he has learned. Lien Rufeng was even more determined to kill Lin Sun. Lin Sun's background was mysterious. He was only a teenager, but he already had such terrible fighting power. If he was allowed to live, how powerful would he be in the future? Whoosh! Suddenly, a white-boned spear pierced through the void and arrived at Lin Sun. The body of the spear was shining with bright starlight. What? Lien Rufeng's pupil shrank. What was this? Puff! There was no time for him to dodge. He felt a sharp pain in his chest, and the next moment, everything went black and he lost consciousness. Seeing this, Lin Sun was stunned. Then he exhaled a long breath of foul air, feeling an indescribable tiredness spread all over his body like a tide. He bit the tip of his tongue to cheer himself up. It was not the right time to rest. Kill them all. A tranquil and sweet-sounding voice sounded in his ears, like a gentle breeze blowing over. Kill them all. The image of Wu Henshui flashed in Lin Sun's mind. Yes. Xia Ji raised her fair and beautiful face. Looking at Lin Sun's pale face, she couldn't help frowning and said seriously, "You should have a rest." Saying this, she grabbed Lin Sun's clothes at the waist, lifted him up, and then rushed away. Taken away by this little girl again, Lin Sun smiled bitterly, feeling ashamed. Then he could no longer bear the exhaustion and fell into a deep sleep. So far, Wu Henshui, Lien Rufeng, and the other 16 people were all killed. Corpses were scattered in different corners of Feiyun Village. It was a ghastly scene under the bloody sunset. Lin Sun had a dream. In the dream, he heard a familiar cold voice. "Tao Seeker, The next time the heaven-accessing place opens is 3 months later. The second test of Green Cloud Path is called body refining. There are 108 chances to pass the test. If you fail in the end, the heaven-accessing place will be sealed again, and it won't open again until 1,000 years later. 3 months? There doesn't seem to be much time left since the last time I tried to break through. Suddenly, Lin Sun woke up from the dream and opened his eyes. Seeing the familiar house decoration, he pondered for a long time and finally shook his head. There was still some time before the next test. It was useless to think too much. He got out of bed, feeling his tiredness had been swept away, but he was still weak. Xia Ji pushed the door open and entered. She didn't seem surprised to see Lin Sun up. She just said, "I'm hungry." Lin Sun was stunned. He thought Xia Ji would ask about his well-being, but she urged him to cook as soon as he woke up. He shrugged helplessly. "I'm going to cook." Speaking of this, he suddenly asked, "How many days have I slept?" Xia Ji answered, "For days." Lin Sun opened his eyes wide. "You haven't eaten anything these days?" Xia Ji nodded. Lin Sun immediately turned around and rushed into the room. He felt quite distressed to let his savior starve for 4 days. While Lin Sun was busy in the kitchen, Shirao Tianren came in a hurry. When he saw Lin Sun, he was pleasantly surprised. "Lin Sun, you finally woke up." "Uncle Shirao, what's the matter?" Lin Sun said casually while he was busy cooking. Seeing Lin Sun's absent-minded look, Shirao Tianren was speechless. Such a big thing happened 4 days ago. How could it not be a matter? You have been in a coma for 4 days. How could it not be a matter? Chapter 41. In the courtyard, the leaves of a weeping willow in the center of the courtyard had turned golden. It was a refreshing autumn day. Lin Sun and Xia Ji were sitting in the courtyard with a stone table between them. 5 big pots of beef stew were piled on the stone table, giving off a fragrant aroma. These beasts didn't look good, but they were all cooked with various spiritual materials and meat of different fierce beasts, so the taste was naturally delicious. On the other side of the stone table was an iron pot filled with spiritual rice. Lin Sun and Xia Ji ate like crazy. They hadn't eaten for 4 days, so they were starving. Sitting on the other side, Xia Tianren looked at them with a smile and quickly told them what happened 4 days ago. It turned out that after the battle, Shirao Tianren returned to the village with a group of villagers. Seeing the corpses strewn all over the village, they couldn't help feeling shocked, but more excited and happy. The death of Lien Ruffing and his companions eliminated a hidden danger in the village, but there were also many problems waiting to be solved. For example, Xia Tianren found that 5 or 6 strangers, including Wu Henshui, died with Lien Ruffing and his companions. Judging from their clothes, they were obviously not ordinary people. Now that they were all dead in Feiyun village, it was hard to say whether there would be any future troubles. Another example was that the death of Lien Ruffing and his companions meant that there were no guards in Feiyun village, which meant that there would be no helpers to escort goods to Green Sun Tribe for exchange. This matter also needed to be solved. After eating 4 bowls of spiritual rice and a pot of beef stew, Lin Sun felt comfortable all over. Making himself a cup of spiritual medicine tea, Lin Sun sorted out his thoughts and asked, "Uncle Xia, do you know the identity of those people who came with Lien Ruffin?" Xia Tianren immediately stood up and said, "Come with me and have a look." Lin Sun glanced at Xia Ji, who was still engrossed in eating, nodded, and left home with Xia Tianren. In the center of the village, on the spacious martial arts field, there were dozens of weapons, soft armors, boots, belts, jade pendants, and other miscellaneous items piled up on the floor. In addition, there were 6 corpses. When Lin Sun and Shirao Tianren arrived, they saw Zhou Zhong and other hunters guarding these things. These were found on Lien Rufing's body. Besides, these 6 bodies are not from our village. I didn't let others touch them. I'm waiting for you to check them and see if you can find some clues. Shirao Tianren explained. Lin Sun praised Shirao Tianren in his heart for being so meticulous. Without hesitation, he went directly to the corpse of Wu Henshui and squatted down to examine it. As early as 4 days ago, when he saw the old man with a goatee for the first time, Lin Sun had sensed an extremely dangerous aura from him. However, the old man had died a violent death. There was a ghastly bloody hole in his chest. It was obvious that he had been killed by a sharp weapon. This reminded Lin Sun of Xia Ji. He was secretly surprised that the little girl's fighting capacity seemed to be more vigorous than he had imagined. At this time, Shirao Tenrun, Zhou Zhong, and others all gathered around, looking at Lin Sun with curiosity and unspeakable awe. For days ago, when they saw the corpses of Lien Ruffing and others, they were all shocked for a long time and finally realized the horror of this 13-year-old boy. It was unimaginable for the villagers that Lin Sun had killed more than 10 practitioners, including Lien Ruffeng, who was at the 4th level of martial realm. Therefore, in their hearts, Lin Sun's image had unconsciously changed. Under the handsome and warm appearance, there was a kind of horror that made them awe. Lin Sun was unaware of these. He searched the body of Wu Henshui for a while, but there was nothing but a black ring. Could it be? Lin Sun looked at the ring carefully. It was dark all over like iron or jade. It was heavy in his hand and gave off a cool air. Lin Sun thought of something. A wisp of spiritual energy gushed out from his fingertips and poured into the ring. In the blink of an eye, a small and narrow space appeared in his mind. It was like a small house, and there were many items piled up inside. There were piles of copper coins, tokens, some spiritual materials, medicinal herbs, and some bottles and jars. Besides that, there was nothing else. It was indeed a spiritual storage device. Lin Sun was delighted. As far as he knew, spiritual storage devices were very precious. They were mainly made of a rare spiritual material called space crystal. As the saying went, store a mountain in a mustard seed. This kind of spiritual storage device had the same effect. It was impossible to have such a treasure unless it was from a wealthy family. Lin Sun murmured, "It seems that this guy has a very complicated background." With a thought, he took out the token from his storage ring. The token was about the size of a palm, and it was forged from a spirit material that looked like warm jade called wood grain stone. There was an image of a medicinal herb on the front, which seemed to be a unique symbol. On the back of the token, a line of words was engraved in the seal script of the Empire. Deacon of Green Sun Tribe, branch of Wu's medicine shop. In an instant, Lin Sun knew that this guy was indeed from Green Sun Tribe. Judging from his identity, he should be a deacon of the branch of Wu's medicine shop. Soon, Lin Sun made another discovery. In the storage ring, there was an incomplete book page on which was recorded the content about blood marrow grit. At the same time, there was an animal skin bag containing various spiritual medicine seeds, weighing more than 10 kilograms. According to the cultivation method of spiritual medicine seeds, these seeds alone could be used to plant at least hundreds of acres of spiritual land. So this is what he wants. Lin Sun was lost in thought. Shirao Tianren couldn't help asking, "What did you find?" Lin Sun answered casually, "If I'm right, Lien Ruffin and his gang must have colluded with this deacon of Wu's medicine shop to occupy the spiritual land of Feiyun village to cultivate spiritual medicine. Occupy the spiritual land." Shirao Tianren, Zhou Zhong, and the others were all furious. The whole village depended on the spiritual land to make a living. Who would have thought that Lien Ruffing was so ambitious as to collude with outsiders to occupy the spiritual land? Obviously, he didn't want to let the villagers live. At the same time, they secretly rejoiced that Lin Sun had eliminated Lien Ruffeng and his gang, which made their plot fail. Otherwise, if it really happened, the consequences would be unimaginable. Lin Sun didn't tell Shirao Tianren about the blood marrow grit. Instead, he took out the sky breacher that he always carried with him and cut open the belly of Wu Henshui with the cyan blade. Blood flowed out. What was he going to do? Shirao Tianren and the others were all shocked. Looking at the colorful viscera and blood, they almost vomited. Lin Sun didn't seem to feel uncomfortable at all. His eyes were focused, and his hands were soon covered with blood after checking the meridians and viscera of the dead body. The scene was so horrifying that Shirao Tianren and the others couldn't stand it anymore. They all turned their heads away and didn't dare to look again. Fortunately, only a moment later, Lin Sun got up and came to the pool on one side of the martial arts field. He washed his hands and said, "This guy is really powerful. He has reached the 8th level of martial realm, Great Zhou realm." He looked relaxed, but he couldn't calm down inside. The reason why he cut open the dead body just now was to verify the old guy's cultivation. After all, the old guy hadn't reached the gang spirit realm, and there was no trace of gang chi around him. It was impossible to judge his cultivation when he was alive just from his appearance. After verification, Lin Sun finally realized that the old guy not only had an unknown background, but also had an extremely high cultivation. If Xia Ji hadn't helped him this time, he might have been killed by this guy. What about Xia Ji? The little girl killed an overmatch on the 8th level of martial realm with one strike. Wouldn't her cultivation be even more powerful? Shurao Tonrin looked solemn and worried. Such a big shot died in our village. Will there be some troubles in the future? Lin Sun shook his head and said, "I'm not sure yet. I'll go to the Green Sun tribe to inquire about it later. Maybe then I can make a judgment." Shurao Tonrin was surprised. "You're going to the Green Sun tribe?" Lin Sun shrugged and smiled. "Of course. Without Lien Ruffing and the others, I have to help you exchange some living materials in the Green Sun tribe." Shurao Tonrin understood and couldn't help feeling touched. Lin Sun waved his hand and interrupted, "Uncle Shurao, you don't have to say thank you. Since I'm a member of Feiyun Village, it's what I should do." Shurao Tianren took a deep breath and suppressed his emotions. "Okay, Lin Sun, if you need anything in the future, just tell me. Although Feiyun Village is poor, as long as you need help, we will do it for you even at the cost of our lives." Zhou Zhong and others beside him also nodded. Lin Sun smiled and turned around to check the trophies in other places of the martial arts field. The trophies this time were not worth mentioning. Most of the things carried by Lien Rufeng and others were not of high value. The only thing that caught Lin Sun's attention was a pair of boots engraved with Gale Wind's spiritual tattoo. The boots were stripped from Lien Rufeng and could be regarded as a spiritual weapon. But judging from the appearance of the Gale Wind spiritual tattoo, they were only crude and common, so the value was not high. Lin Sun took the storage ring and boots and left the rest of the trophies to the village head Shurao Tianren. In the end, the corpses of Wu Henshui and the others were also moved out of the village by Zhou Zhong and the others. They were burned clean, and even the ashes were not left. Before leaving, Lin Sun suddenly thought of something and said to Shurao Tianren, "By the way, Uncle Shurao, the danger has been resolved. How about we go to dig the Feiyun fire copper in a few days?" Hearing this, Shurao Tianren was also excited. He nodded and said, "It's up to you. We don't need to worry about anything when we get the wealth in our hands." Chapter 42. When Lin Sun got home, he heard a series of knocking sounds. In the yard, Xia Ji was hammering a pair of inner armor with a giant hammer. Every time the hammer was hammered, sparks would burst out. Xia Ji was only 5 or 6 years old, but she was carrying a rough giant hammer in her white hand, which looked very incongruous. But in her hand, the giant hammer was as easy as an embroidery needle. With a unique rhythm, she kept hammering with ease. Lin Sun recognized the inner armor. It was made by himself with the scales of a one-horned lizard. 4 days ago, when he was fighting with Lien Rufeng, this inner armor helped him fend off a blow from the back. But it was also because of this blow that the inner armor was damaged. But Lin Sun didn't expect that Xia Ji would take the initiative to repair his inner armor. It was so unexpected. Lin Sun stepped forward and looked down at the giant hammer in Xia Ji's hand. He was shocked again. The hammerhead was like a lump of iron, and there were many fingerprints on its surface. "Did you make this with your hands?" Lin Sun asked. Xia Ji nodded, and without stopping, she said casually, "I didn't have a suitable hammerhead, so I made one with iron." Lin Sun gasped. This was refined iron. This little girl actually used the strength of her fingers to pinch out a giant hammer. He stared at Xia Ji in a daze, wondering if there was an ancient fierce beast hidden in her delicate and beautiful body. Xia Ji dropped the giant hammer, picked up the inner armor, and handed it to Lin Sun. "It's repaired. Have a try." Looking at the new inner armor, Lin Sun smiled and praised. I didn't expect you to have such good craftsmanship. Xia Ji ignored him and walked into the room. I'm going to sleep for a while. Remember to cook for me, Lin Sun. I'll be hungry when I wake up. Bang! With that, the door was closed. Lin Sun shrugged. He had long been accustomed to Xia Ji's maverick behavior, which was totally different from other children. His gaze landed on the giant hammer, and he reached out to pick it up. However, the giant hammer was incomparably heavy and did not budge at all. Lin Sun was shocked. He exerted all his strength and ran all the spiritual energy in his body to lift the hammer. With a slight sense, he immediately knew that the hammer was at least 250 kilograms in weight. Boom! Lin Sun loosened his grip, and the giant hammer fell to the ground, smashing a pit directly. What a little monster! When Lin Sun thought that the hammer was made by Xia Ji, his face became very interesting, and he became more curious about the origin of Xia Ji. I'll have to ask her when she wakes up. Soon, Lin Sun stopped thinking about it and went into the kitchen to cook. Then, he sat down on a chair in the courtyard. With a flip of his hand, an imperial copper coin appeared in his palm. He held it in front of his eyes and looked at it. This was the first time that he had seen a real copper coin. It was about the size of a baby's palm, dark yellow, and felt warm and delicate in his hand. As far as Lin Sun knew, the currency of Xiao Empire was made of a special mineral called Cloud Spirit Stone, mixed with more than 10 kinds of materials such as gold, silver, and copper, and refined through many complicated and strict unique techniques. It was impossible for the outside world to master this kind of money-making technique. The currency of Xiao Empire was divided into 3 categories: gold coin, silver coin, and copper coin. The exchange rate was 1/100. Both sides of the copper coin, silver coin, and gold coin were engraved with unique patterns of Xiao Empire. The pattern on the obverse of the copper coin in front of him was composed of 3 parts. A cluster of blazing Xiao flower represented the royal family of Xiao Empire. An extraordinary green deer standing in the air represented the Green Deer School, the first school of the empire. It was a holy sword that pierced through the sky on purpose, representing the military ministry of Xiao Empire. In addition, the edges of the 3 patterns were engraved with dense and gorgeous cloud pattern branches and leaves, representing the upper-class dignitaries, aristocratic families, and clans that had made great contributions to Xiao Empire. On the reverse side of the copper coin, a landscape was engraved with clouds and mist, magnificent and unpredictable meaning. Even Lin Sun didn't know what the landscape pattern on the reverse side of the copper coin represented, but there was no doubt that it was meaningful. Lin Sun blew on the copper coin in his hand, which made a unique, sweet-sounding sound. This was the Xiao coin. Whether he wanted to survive in Xiao Empire or to cultivate himself, the support of Xiao coin was absolutely inseparable. From a storage ring left by Wu Henshui, Lin Sun unexpectedly gained 1,500 copper coins, which was equivalent to 15 silver coins. The value of the imperial currency was very high. For example, 3 copper coins could buy half a caddy of spiritual grains. The piece of Feiyun fire copper Lin Sun showed to Shirao Tianren was only the size of a thumb, but could be exchanged for 30 copper coins in the Green Sun tribe, which was equivalent to 5 caddies of spiritual grains. However, Lin Sun didn't know much about the specific exchange value of various items in Xiao Empire, so he couldn't understand the purchasing power of 1,500 copper coins. In addition to the copper coins, Lin Sun also gained a bag of spiritual medicine seed from the storage ring, most of which were not very valuable, but were necessary for cultivation. Lin Sun didn't intend to try planting them either. The cultivation of spiritual herbs was very complicated and required a specialized spiritual botanist to plant them. Moreover, spiritual herbs took a long time to grow, usually taking 3 to 5 years to mature. Some rare spiritual herbs even took hundreds or thousands of years to mature. If Lin Sun guessed right, among Wu Henshui's subordinates, there should be spiritual plants masters who were responsible for planting spiritual medicine. However, all this was meaningless to Lin Sun. He planned to find a chance to sell this bag of spiritual medicine seeds and exchange them for money. To Lin Sun's delight, there were some matured spiritual medicines in the storage ring, all of which were valuable. Some were used to refine one's body, some were used to refine one's cultivation, and there were bottles of medicinal pills for healing. These were all treasures. Wu Henshui was on the 8th level of martial realm, so the items in his collection would naturally not be ordinary. After sorting out the items in the storage ring, Lin Sun found there was still a lot of space inside, so he directly threw the sky breacher into it. With this storage ring, it will be easier for me to sell goods in the Green Sun tribe. At least I won't have to worry about being robbed. Lin Sun carefully put away the ring and didn't wear it on his hand. Wu Henshui was the deacon of Wu Herbal Store in the Green Sun tribe. So many people must have recognized it. In this way, it would be too easy to expose himself if he wore it on his hand. Though this pair of gale-like boots is in poor quality, it is still a spiritual weapon. It's a pity that it's too big. I can sell it later. Lin Sun took out the pair of boots he peeled off from Lien Ruffin. After thinking it over, he finally decided to sell them and threw them into the storage ring. After doing all this, Lin Sun stretched himself and finally felt much more relaxed. In the following time, his top priority was to cultivate. As for the mining of Feiyun fire copper, Shirao Tianren could be in charge of it. Lin Sun calculated that it had been more than 2 months since the last time he passed the test. In less than half a month, it will be time to pass the second test of Green Cloud Path in the Heaven Accessing Place. For this matter, Lin Sun absolutely dared not neglect it. After all, when he passed the first test, he got the meditating magic, which was needed to refine the spirit. What kind of benefits would he get after passing the second test? Lin Sun was looking forward to it. In the evening, Shirao Ji woke up and sat at the stone table in the courtyard. Before long, Lin Sun brought up the prepared meal. A few days ago, the village had a good harvest of spiritual grains, which had not been sold yet. So Lin Sun also received bags of spiritual grains from the villagers as gifts. Together with the flesh and blood of nearly 30 fierce beasts, he didn't have to worry about food for a period of time. The only thing that worried Lin Sun was that as time went on, Shirao Ji's appetite grew larger and larger. Almost every day, she had to eat 1 more bowl of rice and a large amount of beast meat. Her little belly was like a bottomless pit. According to the speed of her appetite, Lin Sun couldn't guarantee how long the food supply at home could last. Fortunately, there was no need to worry about it now. While eating, Lin Sun asked casually, "Shirao Ji, where are your parents?" Shirao Ji chewed a piece of fragrant beast meat and shook her head. Lin Sun continued, "What about your home? Do you remember?" Shirao Ji thought for a while and shook her head again. "As long as I can remember, I have lived in the mountains with Uncle Xiong." She looked quiet and serious, but her words made Lin Sun feel a little complicated. This little girl actually lived in the mountains since she was a child. "Who is Uncle Xiong? You saw him that day." Lin Sun suddenly thought of the mighty grizzly bear he saw in the deep forest that day. He couldn't help but be surprised. Is it the fierce beast killed by the voodoo barbarian? Shirao Ji frowned, raised her eyes to look at Lin Sun, and said seriously, "You can't say that about it." Lin Sun hurriedly apologized. "I didn't mean to be disrespectful." In fact, he also felt strange. Shirao Ji was brought up by a mighty grizzly bear. No wonder the words she said were so complicated and obscure when he saw her for the first time. Wait, no. What Shirao Ji said before was not the language of beasts. It was obviously a completely different language. I don't know what the voodoo barbarian is, but I will kill him with my own hands one day to avenge Uncle Xiong. Shirao Ji said seriously, with a pair of clear black, gem-like crescent eyes full of firmness. Saying this, she buried herself in the food again. Interrupted by her, Lin Sun forgot to ask her how she learned the language she used to speak. He thought of the scene of the duel between Sea Spirit Realm that day. One was in a green robe and riding on a sword, obviously a strong practitioner from Xiao Empire. The other one was called Voodoo Barbarian, which should not be a strong practitioner from Xiao Empire. Lin Sun still remembered that the Voodoo Barbarian really wanted to kill Shirao Ji that day, not himself. Coupled with the complicated and strange language spoken by Shirao Ji, Lin Sun couldn't help but speculate that Shirao Ji actually came from somewhere outside the Yao Empire.